Do we have quorum? Carl's here. Do we have quorum?
Carl's not going to make it, but you have 4.
Ooh, I just tried a new tea. That's disgusting.
Sorry to hear that.
Wow. All right. All right, so Amy, do you want me to go ahead and?
Yeah, I think you can probably go ahead. Julie, I assume would be coming in. I haven't heard from her otherwise, but I know her migraines have been an issue.
Okay. Okay, I would like to officially open our September 13th conservation meeting via Zoom. And let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, there's 4 commissioners here. So as we open this hearing, I would like to make a motion that the Conservation Commission enter into executive session to discuss the potential enforcement action at 42 Shagbark Drive, where the potential for litigation is demonstratively likely in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the public body. At which time that we enter this meeting, we will then rejoin this meeting at the scheduled time, or hopefully the scheduled time after that. And so that is my motion, that we would then come back to this public hearing after the close of the executive session. Do we have a second?
Second.
And you need a roll call vote.
Yep. And so, okay, Andrew, can you do us the favor of the roll call?
Absolutely. So Kyle?
Kyle Maxwell, aye.
Brian?
Brian Crowley, aye.
Sarah?
Sarah Seward, aye.
And myself, aye. It's unanimous.
It's unanimous. So now we will conclude this meeting to enter into our executive session, and we will be back in hopefully a little bit. Okay, so we're closing this out.
I can't believe I got on here so quick.
Chase, is this kind of a Rocky 3 for you? You go full circle and now you're back in the Conscom?
Yeah, I'm back where I belong here, Tom.
We like to think so.
I don't feel out of my depth there. Or at least not every day, anyway.
Well, you were not out of your depth at the select boards either, but I'm glad to see you here.
Well, it just means I pulled the wool over your eyes, too.
I would agree with that, Tom. It's definitely nice to have you back. Although, I guess we weren't technically here at the same time before.
Yeah, that's right. You took my seat, right?
Yep.
All right, I think everybody's back.
Ready back. All right, I'm just getting my agenda back up. Oh, that is not it.
But unless you have a better idea, it might be good just to go right into the 10 Oak Hill discussion.
Yep, that sounds good. Do we need to reopen this?
Nope, it was already open.
It's
So
already, okay.
you'll be here.
Yeah, I knew it was open. I didn't know if we need to okay, great. Okay, so continuing with the open meeting, we'll move on to the administrative item 10 Oak Hill driveway. So who's gonna speak to this one?
I can give you a little background if I can get this open, which it's not doing. So this is, gonna take me a second here. Let's see. There it is. Okay. So this has to do with property that the town got as part of the Bennett Orchards project. So sorry, this is skewed a little bit. This is Oak Hill Conservation Land up in here, and here's Oak Hill Road. Bennett Orchards is over here. This parcel here is what was given to the town, to the conservation land. And a little bit closer look, again, here's Oak Hill Road. This is the parking lot over here for the Oak Hill Conservation Land. So what we wanted to do was snake a trail through here. It would make a loop around to the AT&T easement. So I asked a surveyor to survey basically these 7 points that are kind of highlighted in yellow, so we can make sure that we can get through there without a problem. And there is room for a trail, but that corner is right in the middle of Mr. McNeil's driveway, according to the surveyor, and he is here tonight. So the question at hand basically is, now what? What can we, what should we, what do we need to do about that? We can still physically, I believe, get the trail in, but I'm not sure if anything needs to be done about the fact that there's a driveway on there, on what is now town property.
Can I jump in, Amy?
Please.
So, Mr. McNeil, do you agree with this survey?
No, I do not.
Have you had it surveyed?
I have not hired a surveyor, no.
Okay. So I think, well, from our perspective, and at least from my perspective as town council, I'd be interested to know if you think our survey is wrong. But you need to produce evidence to that effect if it is. Otherwise, and Amy, I assume whoever surveyed this for us would memorialize it on a plan?
Yes.
Okay. So in that instance, we've got an encroachment on conservation land. And I think the appropriate action, it would be to give Mr. McNeil time to see if he can demonstrate that our survey is wrong. And if it's not, I think we need to move to working with Mr. McNeil to relocate the driveway. I don't see a land swap being a good solution here unless I'm missing something.
Well, I'd like the opportunity to just provide a little bit of background.
Go ahead.
So all this land that we're talking about was obtained by the Sanderson family hundreds of years ago. And periodically pieces were sold off. My particular lot was carved out by the Sanderson family for a member of their family to build a home in the late 1980s. And the home that I purchased in 2002 was built in 1989. So in 1989, a survey was done and the house was constructed, including the driveway, within the bounds of the lot, within the survey, and all of these plans were filed with the town of Massachusetts, the town of Littleton, and approved by the town of Littleton, long before I came along and bought it. So now, flash forward to 2002, I buy the home. The Sandersons own all of the property surrounding my lot, and they never raised any issues about an encroachment onto their property. It went on that way for at least, somewhere around 10 years. And then the property just west of me began to be developed up the hill. Nobody surveying that property brought up any issues. Again, it was all private property. And then Amy, do you know the year that the developer gifted that land to the town of Littleton? Is that about 10 years ago?
No, it would have been, I think maybe 2019.
Well, when Bennett Orchards was developed, a lot longer than 3 years ago, there was a negotiation with the planning board for the developer to gift the esker and that small strip between my house and my neighbor to the town, which maybe that took some years to be processed. However, that eventually happened, and the builder gave it to the town of Littleton. Now, Chase, I want to say this predates your terms with the Board of Selectmen, but what Bill Brown shared with me was that the selectmen then proceeded to give the land to the Conservation Commission. And then when that became official, does everybody know Bill Brown?
He's a land.
Oh, yes.
Bill Brown explained to me the intention of the Conservation Committee was to cut a trail basically from his house to my house. And he walked the land with me and my neighbor and explained where it's going to be, and this is probably 3 or 4 years ago. And since then, he has blazed the trail, right from his house to my house, out across the street to the Oak Hill Conservation Area. And we've seen people hiking behind our house and between me and my neighbor. And I don't know that anybody's inconvenienced or has any kind of problem with the way that it's working right now. I've never had Bill remark anything to the contrary, that he has any kind of problem with the trail that he's carved out. So and my contention is the house that I bought in 2002 was built in 1989 with plans, including a survey, that were approved by the town of Littleton and constructed on the lot that I now occupy, that I purchased in 2002. And just because it was gifted to the town and then the town decided to give it to the Conservation Committee, I believe that doesn't create an encroachment on my part. And there was all private land when my house was built, and when the land was developed for building houses, and then when the planning board agreed on the plans, it was all private land up until just a few years ago. So I don't believe that my driveway encroaches in any way. I have a copy here of my deed from the Registry of Deeds describing the boundaries. And, Tom, you talk about the surveys, but, those of us familiar with surveying know it's all very antiquated, the system that was used in this part of the country, centuries ago. And, we're using language on my deed about a stone bound at the corner of my lot, which I asked the surveyor that the town of Littleton hired to point out to me, but they refused to do so. And, this stone bound is allegedly on Oak Hill Road, basically next to the road between my property and the Sandersons' property. And there's a stone wall that's been there for centuries, and a lot of those rocks have moved over time. And the surveyor couldn't tell me which stone he was referring to. And, you know, he put a steel pin in the middle of my driveway, damaging part of the driveway. And, you know, without even speaking to me or explaining anything to me. And my driveway is 12 feet wide. So we're really talking about 6 feet of my driveway are somewhat disputed. But in my opinion, it doesn't, and I think you could ask Bill Brown, it doesn't create any kind of problem for the trail or the people that want to hike it.
Mr. McNeil, so I see you have your deed, so that's good. Have you collected any information at all, like from the building inspector or perhaps the planning board? You know, because while I appreciate what, you know, the history you've laid out, that's, you know, information that was new to me. I think we still, you know, we need to get the documentation straight. And so I think big picture, what we're talking about is, you know, we do want to know if you dispute the survey that was done, that's information that we want to go through, but we need documentation to do so. And so I guess I would ask you if you can pull any documentation and get that together, you know, so, because we really can't rely on, you know, people walking through and saying, yes, this must be fine. I mean, I'm sure you can understand that. So in my opinion, the next step is just to gather more documentation.
You can't rely on people walking through. I think, are you talking about the existing trail?
No, I'm talking about, you know, a survey is very different from, you know, you referenced Bill Brown, who is certainly very knowledgeable, but, you know, it's not a survey. It's not a survey or documentation. So I'm asking you for documentation.
Okay, so we're not really talking about the trail tonight.
I think we need to determine, you know, based on what you said, it sounds like if you have documentation to the contrary, that, you know, your driveway.
I never claimed to have, you know, I have my deed.
Yep.
I have a plot plan of my house, and maybe there does, you know,
It could.
somewhere in Littleton's archives, the survey of the property in the late 80s before it was developed, before the driveway was created, before that plan was approved by the town of Littleton. That could exist. But even if we find lots of documentation, how does that impact the trail as it exists today? And what would be your intentions or hopes for changing or amending the trail that currently exists today?
So I'll, I guess, speak, and then I think others should probably chime in as well. The trail, you know, the trail was the piece that, you know, required the need for a survey to make sure we weren't, you know, trying to put a trail where it doesn't belong. But the fact that the trail can go in, unfortunately, doesn't mean that the town can ignore an encroachment. You know, so we need to sort that out. And I don't know, Tom, if you want to clarify.
The town is the town, by using the taxpayer money to conduct the survey, is creating the encroachment. And, you know, somebody showed the dimensions of the strip of land that we're talking about, and it's highly sufficient, in the words of Bill Brown, for the trail, as he, the expert, laid it out and how it's been working now for multiple years.
So
I don't really know.
yeah, I can respond to that.
We can have a debate, I guess, about surveys, even though in this part of the world it's not exactly always black and white. And, you know, I don't think your survey is any more valid than the survey that was done when my house was built, and approved by Littleton. So, you know, I guess that's one way to look at this, or the other way is, I guess, from a conservation perspective of, is there a functioning trail, and or does it need to be changed in some way for some good reason? So I'm wondering what we're talking about tonight.
The trail itself is not the issue per se, but I think Mr. Harrington has a comment.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate your frustration, Mr. McNeil, but I guess a question for you: at the time this lot was carved out in 1989, was it all one owner? Was it all the Sanderson land back then?
I believe the Sandersons, yes, they own this whole part of Littleton,
Right.
and
so-
my lot was carved out and then sold.
In 1989.
Yeah, well, the year my house was constructed was 1989. I don't know about the raw land, if
Right.
that was the prior year or not. I don't know.
Okay. So the way I see it is, the Sandersons owned all this land, and so the first conveyance was they carved out your lot. So when they carved out that lot, the survey at that time was either correct or incorrect, right? So I think you would be arguing that it was correct. I think our evidence, at least currently, is that it was incorrect. And so I think you're getting lost in kind of no harm, no foul territory here, which is, frankly, not the way town council operates. One of my jobs is to make sure that I'm helping the town defend its land, because this is quite simply, if we're giving you 6 feet of land, why aren't we giving your neighbor 6 feet of land? We defend let me finish, Mr. McNeil. We defend every encroachment because it's our responsibility to the taxpayers to do so. So, this might be our surveyor's mistake, and we should understand that if that's the case. But if it's not our mistake, and if we do own the land upon which your driveway is built, and you weren't conveyed that land, it's just where your driveway went, we need to rectify that situation.
Can I jump in and ask a question, Tom? So,
Yep.
Our options. Let's start with the premise that our survey is correct, and I think you're right that isn't necessarily a guarantee. But this is the more complicated scenario. Our survey is correct. 6 feet or so of Mr. McNeil's 6 feet of the driveway is on town property.
Mhm.
What are our options to rectify that? One of them is to ask Mr. McNeil to remove that portion of the driveway from town property. That's obvious and straightforward. Do we have other options available to
Right.
us, recognizing that this was not a willful encroachment?
Right. So since our hands are a little tied because it's conservation land. If this were just general municipal land, it would be a lot easier. So our options are to enforce, well, we can do nothing. Land that's held in a CR can't be adversely possessed, so we can do nothing. We can enforce, enforce the survey and require him to remove his driveway. We can look to do a swap, so he gives us a little hunk of his back and we give him the driveway component. That will require EOEEA sign off, so we'll have to go to the state to have them approve that. We could sell it to him, but at the same time, EOEEA is not going to release the conservation restriction on the land unless we're adding conservation land too. So, I think it's do nothing, enforce specifically so that, what we acquired is what we own, or look to do a swap or a sale of some kind.
Can I ask another follow? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, there is not a CO on this property. It's just owned.
Right. Well, yeah. So wrong terminology, but it's conservation land. So we'd
Right.
still have to go through the Article 97 process.
Understanding that driveways do not have infinite lives, and at some point, Mr. McNeil will presumably need to repave his driveway. Could we choose to not enforce for a fairly long period of time, let's say 10 years or something like that, presuming that Mr. McNeil will replace his driveway in that period of time and remedy the encroachment when he does so?
Yeah, there's no requirement that you enforce the survey or, kind of evict the trespasser.
I take your point not lightly, Tom, that, it's town land and so on, but I do think intent matters here,
Mhm.
right? This is not, this is a very different scenario than someone who willfully or ignorantly paves conservation land.
Right. No, I'm here to give you the law, but you're here to determine, the level of enforcement.
Hey, Tom, this is Anna. I was wondering if there's an easement possible. Could we have an easement for his driveway? Or is that not possible on conservation land?
No, it's possible. So to me, it is possible, but I think the state would look at that if we're dealing with the state. I think the state would look at that as kind of more or less, you're using all the major components of the land, so an easement to me is a more likely scenario if you need to run a water line.
Well, this would be an access easement, right?
Right, but he's paved the land. It's not really serving a conservation purpose. So it could be an easement, but
Well, could an easement be used in Chase's instance where a temporary easement? Can there be temporary easements where after a certain amount of time?
So remember that any interest in land, any actual interest in land, like an easement that we want to convey to Mr. McNeil, would need town meeting approval. And in this case, because it's conservation land, it would also need the approval of the state. So, and I don't think the state would comply, without their typical, give us 3 square feet for every 1 square feet that you're giving. What you can do a license. So a license has to be the kind of the specific definition of a license is it's terminable at will, so that you could give him the right to use it, but you get to terminate that at any time. And so that's typically that's the instrument you use for haying your fields and that sort of thing. I don't think that's ideal here. Honestly, if your idea is to kind of wait and think about it and you're not prepared to pursue enforcement right now and you'll wait and, kind of reconsider that as time goes on, I would rather you do nothing than enter into a formal agreement.
Madam Chair, would you mind if I asked Mr. McNeil a question or two?
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Mr. McNeil, when you purchased the property, do you know if you had a survey conducted or your title company had a survey conducted?
That was 19 years ago, and I do not recall if the title company had a survey conducted.
So I can help you a little bit. So typically, Mr. McNeil, if you got a mortgage, they did what they call a plot plan survey, which, it's kind of a 1-pager, no one came out into the field type of instrument, and is not that valuable and usually can't be, it's kind of a high pass to the mortgage company saying, yeah, without getting out there and doing a survey, it looks like all the building is on the lot and that it generally complies with setbacks, but you usually can't be used to enforce any kind of, it's not specific enough to use as an enforcement instrument.
And then another question, Mr. McNeil, in terms of the trail that exists there, in your experience, and I have to take a closer look next time I'm down around that corner, so I can see it for myself, but you don't have any issue with where that trail is located relative to your driveway. That is, there's like a 75 foot easement there. Is that correct? So we're really not talking about the trail. We're really just talking about the arcane aspects of whatever 100 square feet of driveway. Is that your understanding from looking at it every day?
I think that's a fair depiction. There is a wide strip of land between my property and my neighbor to the west, and Bill Brown had taken me and my neighbor out to the path of the trail that he intended to make, and then he followed through on that a few years ago. And I don't think me or my neighbor have any kind of quarrel about what Bill constructed, for a trail that has been in use now for a few years. I think what your description is pretty accurate.
The trail location was a little bit limited by a pretty steep embankment in some areas, especially as you get a little bit further west. So it got squished a little bit towards Mr. McNeil's property, but it fits. And I will say, I think there was another encroachment also with either a tree fort or the netting for a backstop or something like that. None of those are permanent, so I didn't have as much an issue with those. It was kind of the driveway that was rising to a level of discussion.
Okay. So do we need more discovery? Do we want to continue the discussion? It's getting late. We had a hearing that started at 7:45. I'm just kind of looking at the time.
I have one question if possible.
Yeah.
And that is, if you were to relocate the driveway 6 feet to the east, it was, would that be possible? Are there options for you? If that's
So I
necessary.
guess you're addressing me.
Yes, Mr. McNeil.
I have not consulted with a paving company, so I really couldn't answer your question. As Amy pointed out, there are considerations in terms of like the slope of our yard and the land, and it's also on a really, really dangerous corner. I don't know if you've driven by my house, but there are vehicles and bicycles that come, down Oak Hill Road and really hug the corner very tight to maintain speed. And so it's a very dangerous corner. And I don't know how that would factor into like construction of a different design of a driveway. So there's quite a bit of slope, and there's also curve. I couldn't answer your question.
Okay. I guess I have one that the Chapter 97 approach is something that concerns me. I think we just kind of went through this to get, the water treatment plant built, which is a pretty high priority item. And I'm guessing the state doesn't take it lightly if we continue to go back to them for Chapter 97. And then I think Tom also just said that typically they want like a 3-to-1. So just kind of wanted to put that out there that from what I'm hearing, I don't think that's a viable angle. I do think we need to determine whether it's an encroachment or not, but I'm, certainly open to others, others' thoughts. Should we continue this and try to gather more information? Where you guys want to go?
I'll put down my marker here, Julie, and that's that I think we should I don't think we should enforce on this, and there are two reasons for that. One is the lack of willful intent in the encroachment, and frankly, the other is the realignment of that driveway would necessarily remove 3 or 4 trees as I look at it, and I just don't. I don't think taking down 3 or 4 trees is worth enforcing, 100 square feet of conservation land that isn't otherwise impacting anybody. I just, even Mr. McNeil's concerns aside, I wouldn't make that trade-off.
Well, then maybe a swap is possible. Of the rear part of the property.
Can we talk to, when we first started this discussion, we talked about the survey and accuracy. I do believe we have a duty to come back to Mr. McNeil and to have, perhaps you have a surveyor look at your deed or look at the job that the town's surveyor did to make sure that it is compliant. So I think we need to be diligent with that.
I agree with you, Sarah. I think we do need our facts straight, regardless of which direction we go. Okay, so it sounds like maybe some more information gathering and we'll reconvene.
Sounds good.
Information on the owner's side.
Yeah, if there's, a survey from subdividing the property, recognizing that might be challenging from the 80s, anything that Mr. McNeil might be able to dig out. I didn't realize the tree situation. I think that's a good point. But I think we do, we need to make sure we have our facts in order, before we move forward.
There's a couple of ways the survey can go wrong. And one is, Mr. McNeil, you could take that deed that you have, with the meets and bounds description and see if it lines up with the meets and bounds that are shown on the town survey. That will at least show that we're using the same points. And, so that clears one hurdle. And then, the second one is they just got the points in the wrong place, which is not usual anymore with
6 or 7 feet's a big miss.
Yeah.
That is a big miss. Is it possible, Tom and Amy, to have the town surveyor look at the deed with the meets and bounds to do a gut check? Is that a reasonable thing that we could ask them to do?
Well, I think what we can do that. We can
Okay.
take Mr. McNeil's deed and kind of match it up to see if it matches the survey. And Amy, maybe we could see what's on file in Ed's office and the planning board to see if we find any clues.
I will say that if the width of the property that is shown on the maps is correct, if we shove everything to the west, whichever way I'm going, to the other abutter, we're going to be going into their lawn. So there's a very narrow corridor there, and if it goes one way or the other, it's in someone else's property.
So you're saying we line up and meet the property line on the house
On the new-
uphill.
On the new house, yeah.
In terms of information gathering, Mr. McNeil, would you be comfortable if someone came down and took a look at this? I'd like to see it in person, understanding that, and frankly, I don't think this should have happened. Having a pin put in your driveway without you at least being consulted on it. And I apologize for that. That really should have just been spray painted first and sorted out later. But given that it's there, I'd like to be able to put eyes on it. Is that something you'd be okay with?
Absolutely. You're welcome. Any of you are welcome to come walk the property and have a look. And also I'm happy to share the deed. I also have a drawing from when the engineers built the septic system. They have drawings of my lot, but anything I have, I'm happy to share.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. So I think if you, Mr. McNeil, if you can share your information with Amy, and we appreciate the offer to go to go look at the driveway. And I think it's conservation land next to it anyway, so it should be fairly easy to access. And then Amy will look at the meets and bounds and see if we can match it up just to gut check that we don't have errors. Sound all right?
You want to set up an actual site walk or just have people drive by at their convenience?
I mean, I guess I feel like it's okay for people to, considering we have Oak Hill, parking lot right across the street and conservation land. I feel like it's fairly easy for folks to walk on their own if they want to.
I agree. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. So we'll put this back on the agenda and let Mr. McNeil know next time we're talking about it. Is that the next step for him other than providing information?
So do you want to continue this to the 27th? September 27th? Or October 18th?
Is there a date that's better for you?
Given that it's town meeting preparation time, for whatever role we play, I'd prefer the October meeting.
Okay. Okay. I think that makes sense. Gives us a little more time to get ducks in a row and ask questions about the survey and share documents. Okay, so we'll continue October 18th, you said, Amy?
Yes.
Okay, so that will be on our agenda, and so we'll meet again October 18th, okay?
And I had an appeal update for 6 Cottage Way. Since town council is here, you might just want to put that off to get us back on track, or?
If this is all we have left and then town council can be released, we can do the update now.
Put off as into like November.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's also fine if it's not super urgent.
Ethan, what's your call here? Do we need to?
It's a 30-second update.
Okay, clock started.
Yeah, go ahead.
So to that point, the 2 wetlands bylaw appeals for 6 Cottage Way are in the Superior Court right now. We are briefing the motions for judgment on the pleadings in both cases. All of the papers should be filed with the court shortly after the end of October. My best guess after that is that we'll have a hearing date sometime in December. And that's sort of all we have going at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Or Amy, any comments?
I would also say that you all had taken a vote a while back that, and the way it was phrased, but either the chairman or the agent could respond when a decision was needed quickly. And since it wasn't Jim's name and my name in there, that still stands. That if Ethan needs a quick decision at this point, either I or Julie can probably get together, right, and have to wait for a meeting.
I like that setup. I think it's a much more efficient way of working with council, getting Ethan the answers he wants.
Yeah.
Does that include Sarah as the co-chair?
I think the wording was just chair.
Okay. Just wondering. Okay.
All right, we're good.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for all your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
See you
Tom.
all.
Thanks, Ethan.
See you all.
Nice to meet you, Ethan.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay. We'll move on to our 7:45 public hearing, notice of intent, 628 Newtown Road, replacement of a gravel driveway with permeable pavers. So, John, is that you here for this one?
On field, representing Kartik at 628 Newtown Road. This proposal is to replace an existing gravel driveway with a CMU permeable paver system. We're not proposing any fill. We're simply proposing to replace the gravel driveway with the paver system, which consists of about 12 inches of crushed stone over a geotech material with a couple different layers of filter material, some graded number 2 sand and some washed concrete sand, and then a paver by Ideal Paver called a millstone paver. We're also proposing to add a small turnout up by the garage, as well as possibly pavers along the front by the front steps to create a walkway. We're proposing that the paver system is about 12 to 14 feet wide, and then on each side, a 2-foot gravel shoulder. The total width of this replacement system is the same as the existing gravel system now. In locating the turnout, would have to move a few of the stones that were placed up by the house and along the edge of the driveway to create that that demarcation of the edge of disturbed area. We propose to install a erosion control barrier system first, and then do the excavating work, lay in the various materials, and finish the project so that the finished grades are the same as the existing grades now. And that is the extent of the project.
Thanks, John. Do any commissioners have questions or comments?
Are there any photographs that can be shared with the commission?
Kartik, do you have any? I have several, but they're of the area behind the house, the septic system area.
If you can give me 5 minutes, I might be able to find something. I didn't know I had to keep them ready. Let me just look around my machine. I should be able to find something. Give me like a few minutes.
Or a plan to show up.
So
John,
what?
John, do you have a plan?
Yes.
Can you share that?
I'm sorry. I thought you had, yes.
Hey, John, can you just comment about whether the paver area is going to be exactly the same as the gravel driveway is now?
Yes. The intent is not to create any new disturbed areas. The intent is to place the system within the lane that's already created by the gravel driveway, and then use the existing gravel banks as the shoulders.
Does that include that proposed turnout you mentioned? Is there already a turnout in that area? Or is that added?
There's grass, and there's some small amount of stone dust or processed base. Let's see, 1 second on the plan.
Hello. Yeah, actually the driveway can be seen on Google Maps, so I'll just share my screen with you, if that's okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Uh,
I'll send something on my.
So it's the total area beyond the bridge all the way up to the house?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So the paver area is right after the bridge, right
Correct.
beyond toward the house?
Yes, and then
Beyond the bridge, and then all the way to the house?
right up to the front of the garage doors. There's a turnout to the, if you're looking from the street, the left side, and then a walkway very close to the foundation along the front. And I'm
Is the turnout area marked on the ground through stakes or painting, John?
no,
Okay, can that be done so the commissioners, there's some newer commissioners that I'm not sure have been on this property,
of course,
know how sensitive it is?
yes, it can.
I would encourage commissioners to go out.
It sounded like part of the plan was to move some of the large rocks that I think were to demarcate, to ensure that, the area beyond didn't get inadvertently disturbed. Did I hear the proposal is to move those to enlarge the turnout?
Yes, only at that turnout area right up adjacent to the garage.
I think from a historic point of view, a lot of the commissioners don't know that we worked really hard to put everything together on this plan, and those were put there for a reason. We also had a tremendous amount of concern for plowing as well, where snow storage was going to go, that there's no treatments out there. So I think it's important that we look why those are moving.
They're moving just in that area where the turnout would be.
Right, and the turnout was not permitted in the filing.
That's correct.
Right. So I know I joined the commission, I think right before the end, right before this project was permitted. And I do know that what was approved absolutely maximized what was acceptable. And I know there were, concerns with the gravel, which I think, and I appreciate that's, I think, why they would like pervious pavers instead of the gravel, because of course the gravel gets plowed around, and can be problematic. Whereas I am aware of the history, I have been on the site. I'm aware of some of the challenges that have existed almost even right up to the day of closing. Items were of real concern by the stream. I am strongly disinclined to agree to expanding any more of this site, beyond what was already approved. So that's my thought on this.
I follow the same sentiment, worked really hard on this.
I agree too. I have zero appetite for expanding the footprint. And to be perfectly frank, I don't have much appetite either for pavers. You're going to increase the runoff of pavers, even interlocking concrete pavers relative to a gravel driveway. And that's bad for the systems around it.
I'm curious with the amount of precipitation we've had this year and the beaver activity, how everything is going with that stream there. As a homeowner, if you could comment on that, perhaps.
Hi, we really do not want to expand the area. As far as I know, I tried to share a picture with you, but I couldn't say anything while I'm sharing. But I'll show you that picture of the area that John is talking about. I have a better one to show you. So let me just. No, we don't want to. We don't want to disturb the forest in any which way possible. Okay, so that's really not our intention. We just want to have a driveway that we want to lose the next couple of years. So,
And it's essentially the same area as what it is.
so
All right, you want to see the plan?
Yeah, and I think if you're trying to talk, we can't hear you. I'm guessing maybe because you're sharing a screen. You mentioned that before.
Well, moving forward, what would the commission like to do with this?
I mean, in my sense is if they'd like to mark it out, I'm happy to go look at it. But I do think the property owner and Mr. Field benefit from knowing where I stand, which is why I laid it out. But I'm happy to go look. I think your point, Sarah, about seeing the layout as they propose it is valuable.
John, do you have a figure? I can't really tell from here. That overlays the existing with the new, like the moving of the boulders that you had just mentioned, for example.
That's a great suggestion, Julie. To do an overlay and let us know what the percentages are.
Yeah, I have the existing and the proposed, but you have to present over the other.
John, just so you know, you're breaking up a little bit.
So I want to say that that area which John has highlighted on the right hand side of the driveway, there aren't any boulders over there. I mean I know this area like the back of my hand because I've been pulling weeds out of that area all summer. So there aren't any boulders over there. There is a boulder well off to the behind and to the right of that. So if you're looking at where the house is, so there are boulders that are quite a few feet away from this area that John has highlighted with the cross, with the checks kind of thing. So the turnout area is not going to involve moving any boulders. All right, and if it does, I will make sure that nothing is disturbed. Okay, but I know because those weeds, they grow like crazy over there and I pull them out with my bare hands. So I know there are no boulders over there.
With all
John, are you
due
working
respect,
off
though,
the as-built that was submitted to the Conservation Commission?
On the existing, yes. This one here.
so that comment about boulders not being there is concerning and problematic to me because the way that the revised drawing is annotated, there's a new edge of disturbed area marked by boulders. And if what I'm hearing is that we wouldn't need to move any boulders, then that tells me that the original as-built is incorrect.
Kartik, could you put that picture that you had just up? There were 3 boulders. Exactly.
Yeah, hold on. I'll do that. Hold on.
I mean, to move this along, I think that what we suggested was let's go look at this in the field. We can look at the drawings all we want, but the fact of the matter
Yeah.
is standing at it and looking at it in the field will be much more instructive.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to please feel free to come over and take a look yourself. Okay, so I'm just trying to, I don't know.
So John,
Yeah.
what our suggestion would be is once you have that demarcated in the lot area, if you could just let Amy know, we'd be happy to go out and look at it. So would the commission like to extend this to the next meeting or go out to October 18th?
Could you please put Kartik, could you put that picture back, please?
I cannot share my screen till you stop sharing, John. That's what it says at least. Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear that the as-built and picked up the 3 stones that are on the left side of the screen. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the order of operations is the proposed disturbance or the proposed work gets demarcated, John can let Amy know, and then we can set up a site visit when we know it's demarcated. And then we can determine whether it gets continued to the 27th or the 18th, depending on when we can go see it. And when, John, I don't want you to lose the request that we have a figure that shows the as-built with the overlay of what's proposed.
I think that's very important.
So let Amy know when you get a chance to demarcate the location of the proposed work, and then we can get a site visit set up.
We do have to continue to a date certain.
Okay.
So we could just pick September 27th. And if that doesn't happen, then we
can
could
just continue. Does that sound okay, John?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. That's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I need to, okay. All right. Next, 8 p.m. public meeting request for determination of applicability. 62 Weishwood Heights, replace failed sewage disposal system. And who's there for this one? Is that you, Kevin?
Yes, it's me.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Let me get my screen up. Share it. Okay, so I'm Kevin Ritchie from Civil Solutions. I'm here on behalf of Gertrude McLaughlin. The owner is 63 Witchwood Heights. It's an existing home. The home is for sale. Had a Title V inspection. The system failed the Title V inspection. We've got a wetland here across the back of the yard, or maybe more through the middle of the backyard. We've got the 50-foot buffer, and it comes across here. And then the 100-foot is basically out here at the street line. The existing septic tank is here off the corner of the driveway, so we've got a paved driveway here. The existing septic tank, and then the existing leach field, which has failed the inspection, is here, basically adjacent to the wetland. So we've proposed a new system here, basically pushed it up far from the wetlands as we can get, kind of stuffed it up here in the front corner of the lot. Proposing, so we've got an erosion barrier here, silt fence, and straw wattles. The plumbing is kind of fixed here in the back. Again, this area here is the edge of the pavement. So we'll have to cut some of the pavement to get the new pipe in. The existing septic tank, we will pump that and fill it in place. The existing leach field, we'll just abandon that in place. We won't do anything to it, just more sewage going to it, so it should just become inert. We've got a new septic tank here, just outside the 50-foot buffer. Then we've got a pump chamber, so we're pumping the effluent up to the leach field up here in the corner of the lot. The plan has been before the Board of Health. It has been approved. And basically, we've maximized the offset to the wetland. We can't really go any further away from the wetlands there. Here, at its closest point, we're 70 feet from the wetlands with the new leaching area.
Okay.
Kevin, can you confirm that that's town water and not a well on that property?
Yeah, so this town water comes in, the gates here, comes straight into the house, here, straight in the front.
Thank you.
Kevin, did you say into the field area or the tank? Am I looking at that wrong? What's the distance from the wetland to the edge of the new tank? It's right at the 50, or is that right at?
Yeah, so it's just over the 50. It's like 51 feet.
Gotcha.
You can see here's the 50-foot buffer here from the edge of the tank, just maybe foot and a half off that.
Yeah, I think your filing says 52 feet, Kevin.
And Kevin,
Now,
have
I'm
you-
sorry, part of the plan is cut off. Is that circle in the back, that's where the old septic system was?
Right here, yeah.
Okay.
So that's basically the existing leach field here. And this little circle over here, that's the existing septic tank. So the leach field, again, we're not doing any work here in the backyard. Just going to abandon it in place. And then the septic tank, that'll be pumped out again.
and Kevin, you prepared a waiver?
We did.
You prepared a waiver? I thought you were just looking for a negative determination here.
Yeah, but I thought the waiver was required as part of the filing.
You might be right. And
Yeah, if you're gonna, you
We're
probably need to grade
basically
or work.
with the filling of the existing tank, it's like it's closer than 50. So
Yeah.
sure. Yep.
Yeah, and we can do RDAs with a waiver before, or
Yep.
negative determinations with a waiver is something we've done before. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it looks like you've gotten that system as far as you possibly can,
yeah.
away from the wetlands. So I don't know if there are questions or comments, or someone wants to make a motion.
Yeah, out of curiosity, what's the tree that you have labeled the front? Is that staying or is it going?
No, this particular one here
Yeah.
is that one's going. I think it's either cedar or a spruce or hemlock. It's some kind of evergreen.
And that's the only one?
Yeah. Then this stuff here is like garden, maybe some lilacs in there. Mainly a little.
Lilacs are invasive. You can pull those out.
Oh, but they smell so good.
They do. I didn't say I didn't like them. So there.
A couple of standard questions for you, Kevin, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Are you going to have to stockpile any material?
There's not a lot of room to stockpile it.
Well, I guess that's what I was thinking. I just want to make sure that that's going to be within your limits of work and, not stored on the right side of the house without erosion controls.
I don't see them putting anything over here. If they do store anything, it'll be basically beside the tank, so that when they'll dig the tanks, they probably remove some of it. They may stockpile a small amount here, but it'd be more in their way to work than.
What do you fill the old septic tank with?
They may actually use some of this material here. It was pretty sandy in this area. They may just take some of this, and once it's pumped out, just because nobody living in the house now, so they can pump it out and fill it in before they actually put the new tank. So it'll just be some kind of clean soil, basically sand.
Looks good to me.
Any other questions or comments? No,
I think it looks good.
entertain a motion. Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
What's the
I move
negative?
that we issue a negative determination on 63 Witchwood Heights, U37-22 for a replacement of failed septic system.
Second.
And a waiver?
Including the waiver.
Second that.
Andrew?
So I'll do the rundown. Julie, can you guys hear me?
Barely.
Barely? How about now?
Oh, yep, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll do the roll call. Julie.
Julie Rupp, aye.
Jace.
Jace Gerber guy.
Brian.
Ryan Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Sarah.
Sarah Seward, aye.
And myself, aye. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thanks. In the future, would you rather I not do a waiver, or is a waiver the best way to go on something like this?
Always good to have it in your pocket.
Yep, that was good. Also, I appreciated that you highlighted the wetland buffer lines for us. That made it easier to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just show us your stockpiles next time.
Yeah. There was work there is work in the 50, so the waiver that's the way to go.
Yeah.
With the old system.
Driveway.
Just to clarify. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Moving on, discussion, Littleton Water Department regarding COBs and conservation restrictions and Zone 1 protection. We have who we have here for that. Oh, I see Corey. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Julie. Hi, everyone. How you all doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for allowing us to come tonight. I'll try to keep it short. Can I share my screen here? Is that?
Please do.
All right. Are you able to see those slides? All right, excellent. So I brought Jason Panos with me from the Panos Law Group. He's the attorney that's been assisting us on this project. He specializes in land use and real estate law. So I'll jump right into it here. So a little bit of orientation here for those that might not be familiar with Cobb Pond and the wells that exist there. If you can see my cursor on the screen. So this is Neshoba Road down here with Nagog Pond to the southeast and Cobb Pond obviously in the middle of the screen here. And I highlighted a few parcels here which will become relevant as I go through the presentation here. And then the blue circles are where the water department bedrock wells were installed a few years ago. So there's 3 of them. They're all on town-owned property under the care, custody, and control of the Conservation Commission. And then there's some other abutting parcels as well that we'll get into in a few moments here. So just a brief history. The first one of these bedrock wells was actually drilled way back in 2001. It's 600 feet deep. And at that time, there was a short-term pump test that showed very promising results. But the town of Concord expressed some concerns about a potential hydrologic connection between the wells and Nagog Pond. So the water department conducted several hydrogeologic studies over the years, proving no connection between the well and Nagog Pond. And then by 2016, we were comfortable enough to go ahead and drill the additional 2 wells. Those ones are not quite as deep, but still 450 feet deep. We conducted a short-term pump test on those, which showed even more promising results. So at that point, we decided to move forward with developing the site as a public water supply. So we designed and implemented an extended pump test with Mass DEP to determine the sustainable yield of the wells, their suitability as a public water supply, and whether or not there was any connection to Nagog Pond to settle that once and for all. So we did that. The pump test demonstrated the Cobb's wells provide high quality water suitable for development of a public water supply with a safe yield over 500,000 gallons per day with very negligible impact to Nagog Pond. So Mass DEP at this point is ready to issue the withdrawal permit so that we can move forward with construction to actually bring these wells online. The one final piece that needs to be resolved before they can do that is the protection of the Zone 1 aquifer protection area for the wells. So if I go back, this is just like the first slide I showed, except now I'm showing the 400-foot radius around each of those 3 wells. So those red circles there, and that's how DEP defines the Zone 1 protection area. So they overlap to a large degree, but they also overlap several different parcels. You know, there's the 2 town-owned parcels that the wells are actually located on, as well as the one to the northwest of the pond. And then there's a large parcel owned by the Littleton Conservation Trust, and then 2 privately held parcels, private homeowners. So essentially, the water department needs to either acquire through ownership or through a conservation restriction control of the Zone 1 aquifer protection area. So that's a requirement by DEP, is that the Board of Water Commissioners themselves have control over that area. So again, just this outlines the ownership here. Cobb Pond Associates is actually the pond itself. It's actually designated as a separate parcel. And then you'll see, of course, the Conservation Commission owns 3 of the parcels. The Conservation Trust owns 1 of them, and then the 2 privately held ones. And then the conservation restrictions are somewhat complex in this area. There's a lot of them. The Conservation Trust is the CR holder in many of the cases, except where they are the owner, in which case the Conservation Commission is the CR holder. And then on one of these parcels, there's 2 CR holders, the trust and the commission. So it gets a little bit complicated there. But essentially what Mass DEP requires for this aquifer protection in the Zone 1, as I mentioned, is that we either own or control the Zone 1 of the wells and limit activities to those directly related to the provision of water supply, or to activities that have no significant adverse impact on drinking water quality. For example, passive recreation. So that's defined as like walking, hiking, cross-country skiing, that sort of thing. And things like horseback riding, for example, can be considered on a case-by-case basis and just require separate Mass DEP written approval. As long as there's no concentrated activity in the Zone 1, most other types of recreation are typically allowed by DEP. So as long as it's not like a horse stable, for example, in the Zone 1, they would typically allow horseback riding through the area. So essentially what the Water Department proposed to DEP and the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to acquire control of the Zone 1 is to create one master conservation restriction that covers that entire Zone 1 area and includes all of the necessary restrictions to protect the aquifer. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of conservation restrictions existing already. So we would essentially make those existing conservation restrictions subordinate to the master conservation restriction, which would be granted to the Littleton Board of Water Commissioners by each of the grantors. So the town, that's a little bit of a funky one because its water department is the town as well, but it needs to be, the master conservation restriction needs to be held by the Board of Water Commissioners. So the town, and Jason will get into it a little bit on his slide, the town would have to sort of transfer the care, custody, and control of the Zone 1 area of those parcels to the Board of Water Commissioners. And same thing with the Conservation Trust, Cobb Pond Associates, and the 2 private landowners there. So approval is required by each grantor, town meeting, which is coming up on October 25th, and then it goes to the state legislature for their approval. And then once it's all said and done, the water department would then be responsible for protection of this land in perpetuity. So we would conduct annual monitoring, much like a land trust would do for a conservation restriction. We're required to do that by DEP for all of our Zone 1 areas. We would make sure there was no encroachment or any activities that weren't supposed to be allowed there. So I went through that pretty quick, but I'll let Jason jump in with this final slide to kind of get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of what would be required here. I think you're on mute, Jason.
Thank you. My name is Jason Panos, for the record, practicing law at 246 Andover Street, Peabody, Massachusetts. I just want to clarify something that was in the prior portion of the presentation. The Conservation Commission's interest is actually only in lots 10 and 11. Lot 9 is owned by the town of Littleton outright. And so what kind of approvals are required to kind of facilitate the water department getting control through its conservation restriction? As Corey mentioned, we propose asking all of the stakeholders who were mentioned in that previous slide, being the landowners and the holders of conservation restrictions, to grant us a conservation restriction over the Zone 1 land only. That is the aggregate of the portion of property within those 3 red concentric circles. And so where the Conservation Commission is concerned, to facilitate that, we would need a determination signed by the members of the Conservation Commission that transfers back to the select board for general municipal purposes the management and control of lots 10 and 11 specifically, so that the select board could then grant that master zone 1 conservation restriction to the water department for zone 1 purposes. So the determination that we would ask be signed by the Conservation Commission, and of course we'd provide a draft of that we can discuss at a later time, would transfer back to the select board the care and custody, management, and control of lots 10 and 11 for zone 1 purposes, basically consistent with a lot of the conservation purposes for which it was vested, management and control was vested in the Conservation Commission in the first place. As Corey mentioned, because there are several conservation restrictions out there already, 5 in fact, one of which, the so-called CR5, which the Littleton Conservation Commission holds an interest in, we would ask the Conservation Commission to subordinate that interest in that conservation restriction to that, what we would propose being that master zone 1 conservation restriction. It really doesn't change a heck of a lot because those conservation restrictions existing are consistent with the zone 1 requirements and uses. But it just cleans things up and vests within the water department the control that the statute and supporting regulations require. And I have a catch-all bullet point of any and all other documents and instruments required of the Littleton Conservation Commission necessary to effect the Zone 1 conservation restriction. That's just catch-all, but quite frankly, there isn't anything beyond the determination right now and the subordination, which, by the way, we would record at the Registry of Deeds. There isn't anything beyond that I can think of that would be required. And of course, as we contemplate all of this, we would be providing a draft of the Zone 1 conservation restriction to you for your review. So with that, and through the chair, I would yield back to Corey to answer any questions or listen to any comments that you might have.
Thank you. Corey, do you have anything else you wanted to add before we open it up?
I don't believe so. I think we covered most of it. I know fairly quickly. This was just obviously the first time kind of presenting it all to you, and we would obviously come back to request a vote with the Conservation Commission at a later date. Not too much later, obviously, before the meeting, but sometime in the next month or so. I should mention we met with the Conservation Trust last Wednesday. Gave a very similar presentation to them. They were very much supportive and on board with the whole approach. They're obviously looking forward to seeing the draft conservation restriction as well, so they can dig into that. So once we have that, we'll send that to both parties. But yeah, any questions that anybody has, we're happy to answer them.
And actually, if I could just add to what Corey indicated, the reason why the conservation restriction, we're still working on it, is that the DEP decided it was a good idea to release a new draft model conservation restriction in the last 2 weeks, literally, as we've been discussing this for a very long time and really preparing based on the old model templates. So we're working through this, and they are significantly different. So, and they want us to use their model to facilitate the process ultimately. And also just to add, the determination I mentioned is to get us to town meeting. The subordination will get us to recognition that that zone 1 conservation restriction is in fact superior to the other 5 on record. So I hope that clarifies things a little bit.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I also understand and want to either clarify or reiterate that in order for the town to use these wells, Mass DEP requires us to own and protect and have control over, with us, I mean the Water Department, not the Conservation Commission, over the Zone 1. So it's important that that control is retained so that the town can use these wells.
Can I ask something? Oh.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, so I just wanted to make sure I am getting the legal structure correct. Are you saying that the ownership would be granted to the select board of the parcel 10 and 11, but the restrictions, the conservation restrictions would remain in place, and that's why they have to be subordinated, because it wouldn't change the restrictions, it would just change the ownership, correct? So when it's transferred to the select board, I was just wanting to make sure that we aren't risking any disbandment of a conservation restriction on the properties you're talking about. It's just the ownership.
Corey, if you don't mind, I'll take a stab at that.
Sure, yep.
So that is actually that's an excellent point, and that's absolutely correct. That we're not disturbing, except in order of priority, who holds the conservation restrictions existing as of today. Just a point of clarification as well. The town owns parcels 9, 10, and 11. It's just when they took parcels 10 and 11, they did so vesting management and control in the Conservation Commission. So ownership remains in the town regardless. It's just the management and control aspect. However, that is irrespective of the conservation restrictions themselves. So the named grantees in those conservation restrictions are not disturbed. They will remain the same. So whatever the Conservation Commission manages through those conservation restrictions existing, they will continue to manage, both within the Zone 1 concentric circles and obviously without. We're only talking about land affected within those concentric circles. And that is the extent to which the subordinations and the master Zone 1 conservation restriction is superior, only in relation to the land within those concentric circles, the so-called Zone 1 area. But to reiterate the point, the holders of the conservation restrictions will be undisturbed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
So I recall when we transferred land from conservation for the Whitcomb Ave treatment plant, we had to do the Chapter 97 determination, and we had to declare that it wasn't necessary for conservation, and then it's supposed to be traded for other land, and then so I'm just wondering, does some of that come into play, and is town council involved in this as well, or how does that piece work?
So Corey, through the chair, I can also answer that. So yes, it is implicated, Article 97. It's a little different than that, though. We would be asking for the Conservation Commission to technically relinquish the land for conservation purposes, and grant back to the select board the management and control for Zone 1 purposes. The conservation and Zone 1 purposes are very consistent. So, and the Article 97 is implicated because of that change in use, and because of the change in control. However, the ownership in the town never changes, really. It's just people wearing different hats and who is responsible for what. So to piggyback on my earlier point, to the extent the Conservation Commission is still responsible and holds conservation restrictions, they will continue to do so. However, you've got this added layer now with the consistent Zone 1. And while consistent, it's still deemed a change in use, which implicates Article 97. Does that clarify? It's a little complicated, but.
Yeah, no, I recall Article 97,
Yeah.
again, from the treatment plant, which we worked closely with the water department on.
Sure.
And again, I understand the importance of the Zone 1. I'm just wondering from a practical standpoint, Amy, is town council supposed to review the Article 97 language? Are they supposed to, how is this supposed to go forward?
Yeah, so,
As far as I know, for town meeting, town council has got this on Friday also at the same time. I don't think they've looked at it yet.
Okay.
yeah, so they're reviewing now. I think, Amy, I sent you the draft town meeting article as well. So town council is looking at that.
Okay.
Jason drafted that up. Town council will provide their comments, and we'll get that finalized over the next, I guess we have 2 weeks now.
And we're at the so-called placeholder. I apologize, Jason Panos again, through the chair. We're at the so-called placeholder stage. So we do expect that there will be some tweaks to the town meeting article. However, I think it lays out quite nicely the structure that we're talking about. And, to the extent things need to be clarified, that's where we expect any changes to take place. And obviously, if the Littleton Conservation Commission has any additions or language clarification they'd like to say, I'm sure that input would be welcome, because the determination that we will ultimately ask you to vote on must be consistent with that town meeting warrant article.
And Amy did share with us the language with that. It's a fairly lengthy read, I must say. I started to look at that earlier.
It's hard, and yeah, I tried to make it as pithy as possible, but we're really asking for 4 things in that warrant article, and I tried to break it down. And really, each of the elements are denoted as a further in italics and bold. So if you want to break down the concepts, start with each further, and then it becomes kind of bite size, if you will.
I'm going to shift the conversation slightly. Do we feel, and Corey, this will come back to you, do we feel as though the temperature of the of the room at town meeting this is going to be palatable and people will understand what we're asking? I think first senses people are going to think that we've approved for conservation and now we're potentially building structures, we're pumping stations. So I'm just curious if we've had any meetings with people outside of our committee and the Conservation Trust.
No, Nick Lawler's at the select board meeting right now as we speak, also discussing this with them at a high level. And then I'm still in the process of reaching out to the other private landowners over there. But I don't believe there's any reason to think there'll be any controversy per se, because as Jason described, there's really nothing changing about the protection of the land. Even the 2 parcels where the wells are currently located, there's already an existing easement for the water department to build a pumping station there. So that already exists. It's been in place for, I think, almost 20 years now. We've gotten many extensions on that order of conditions. So all we're doing is essentially changing who controls that area. All of the protections remain essentially the same. So it's meant for aquifer protection, which means conservation plus any necessary infrastructure to withdraw the water for public water supply.
That's good to hear that you can stay within the easement and the prescribed footprint of future development.
Yeah, so we haven't designed anything yet, so there is a chance that we may have to go outside of that footprint or move where that footprint's located, in which case we would obviously have to come back for either a new or amended order of conditions for that. But the concepts remain the same. On lots 10 and 11, it'll be aquifer protection. There may be or will be some sort of infrastructure there to pump the water out of the wells, whether it's in the already defined easement area or something else that we agree upon at a later date.
And if I could add to that, Corey, correct me if I'm wrong, but the infrastructure, those wellheads are already installed and in place, which is how you back into the description of the Zone 1 area, which again is the aggregate of those red concentric circles. So, and backing into that, all of the orders of condition are in place to allow for that existing infrastructure. All we're doing through the conservation restriction is now tying that all in and bringing it live, bringing that existing infrastructure live. Is that a fair characterization, Corey?
Yeah, the only addition would be, like I said, a pump station, so a small building, it'd be like a small brick or block building that would have all the pumps and the drives and all that sort of stuff. Everything else would be underground. You wouldn't even see anything else besides that.
Would you be able, if that water needed treatment, would you be able to use the existing or newly built Whitcomb treatment plant, or you need to think ahead about treatment?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you could do that. It's just a very long way, so it would be a very expensive pipeline to bring it all the way there. It's twice as long as the transmission main that we just built from Spectacle Pond to Wickham Ave.
Yep. It is long. That's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah.
Is there land elsewhere identified for a treatment plant?
No, we don't believe there's going to be any treatment required. We've had the conversations with DEP already. During that extended pumping test, the water quality was very good. So if there were any treatment required, it would likely just be what they call like an air stripping tower. It's very small. It would be incorporated as part of that pump station that I talked about, because there was slightly high levels of radon in the wells, because they're bedrock wells. It's very common for bedrock wells. So
yep, a lot of radon around here.
Yeah. Okay. So if we had to treat for that, it would just be this very small vertical structure coming out of the roof of the pump station.
Okay. I see a couple hands too. I know it looked like Chase had a comment.
I had a couple questions, and
Joe.
I'm sorry, I'm going to rewind us a little bit because, Mr. Panos, I appreciate your thorough answers, but I'm going to ask you some hypotheticals to make sure I understand this correctly, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, as long as there are pumping wells there, functionally, it doesn't really matter who controls the conservation restrictions. The fact of the matter is, as long as there are pumping wells, there's really only conservation type uses that are allowed within proximity of those wells. Do I understand that correctly?
That is, well, yes and no. That is, the premise is correct. However, the manner in which it does matter who holds the conservation restrictions, because, and that's why we're doing this. it is through what we propose to be that superior zone 1 conservation restriction, that master, if you will, that we obtain control. There are 2 ways you can get control over property.
I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you. I understand that there's a legal structure that you have to comply with. What I'm talking about is the functional on the ground, like how the land can actually be utilized.
Yeah, that's
I'm sorry.
correct.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I didn't want to repeat something. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page and we were crystal clear about what was going on. But that's correct. That generally, as I reviewed the conservation restrictions in place, I think it was EEA, DEP's, certainly the water department. It was our general consensus that those conservation restriction uses prescribed, and those other 5 that are in place are generally consistent with the Zone 1 requirements. So functionally, yes, there will be no change in the manner in which the property is used and restricted.
How does this impact the portions of lots 9 and 10 that are not within the Zone 1?
It doesn't. It doesn't impact any property outside of the Zone 1.
I thought we were transferring control of lots 9 and 10 to the select board from the Conservation Commission. We're only transferring control within the Zone 1?
That's a very good question. And I would like to read the warrant article because I do believe that it only impacts the Zone 1 area.
Okay.
However, the one thing I guess I need to take a look at is if we bifurcate in that manner, if we basically say, because essentially that's all we're talking about is the Zone 1 area, do we have to now submit an A&R plan to the planning board to carve out effectively those Zone 1 parcels from the others? And I think I would want to avoid that extra step.
Okay, and I guess therein lies some of my concern to some degree for the Conservation Commission in that there is value, I think, for conservation purposes in the land outside of the Zone 1. And 9 and 10, there isn't a lot, but the access to a big portion of that is via land outside of
and Corey and I did talk about this earlier. We can, and I've done this in other municipalities where we've done something similar, we can vest care, or we can designate that area outside of the Zone 1 and maintain that management and control in the Conservation Commission. And we can make that clear.
And then my third sort of and most hypothetical of questions for you, Mr. Panos, is let's say down the road, these wells go away. And I understand no one is expecting that to happen, but looking all the way down the road, these wells go away. The Zone 1 protections that are inherent in the fact that they're Zone 1 go away. Talk me through what happens, who has care, custody of and control, and now how this land that it was formerly within the Zone 1 is protected for conservation purposes.
There is a mechanism to unwind the Zone 1, the conservation restriction, and obviously if the land is abandoned, then you would unwind the process. You'd unwind the conservation restriction, that so-called master, And that is a hypothetical. Your other questions were actually very practical and on point. This is a hypothetical. And I assume you'd have to go back to the Article 91 process because, again, you've got the change in use.
And I guess what I'm asking there is, if the wells are no longer operational, there is no Zone 1.
Yep.
And now the water department or the select board has care, custody, and control of lots 9 and 10.
Yep.
Did they essentially turn into just generic municipally controlled lots at that point, such that the town could dispose of them as they see fit?
Not automatically.
Not automatically.
No.
So if I could interject here, Chase, you hit this right on the head because this was my hypothetical question as well. Do we not have the ability to have something written in where it's like a life tenancy? Something more on the simple basis that if it is abandoned or unusable, it needs to come back to conservation for its first entity.
There is still a CR on it.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The CRs would still be in effect, right?
Existing.
Even if it changes, even if the zone ones go away.
Yeah, Jason, I think you had mentioned earlier how the existing conservation restrictions remain in effect underlying.
Those never go away.
Right.
Okay.
Those conservation restrictions, the 5 that are in place right now, most of which are held by the Littleton Conservation Trust, those, and one of which is held by the Conservation Commission, those don't go away.
So if the protections associated with the Zone 1 go away, those conservation restrictions that are currently in place go from subordinate to primary?
Not automatically. You'd still have to unwind this. It's still a conservation restriction that's on record.
Okay.
And it does run with the land in perpetuity. And if the Zone 1 purposes were abandoned, then you'd have to go back and unwind this and officially terminate it.
From a practical standpoint, if for whatever reason the water department abandoned those wells, if the underlying conservation restrictions are still in effect and the Zone 1 protections don't allow anything there except for conservation land or water infrastructure, from a practical standpoint, nothing else could happen there.
Then nothing changes, right? And I guess functionally, I don't care what the deeds say or who controls what. My concern is ensuring conservation purposes with the land, and frankly, I don't. It doesn't matter to me whose name is on the paper.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because functionally, as I said, the 5 existing conservation restrictions don't go away. This master conservation restriction for Zone 1 purposes, while it's in place, the purposes are consistent with the conservation, existing conservation restrictions and conservation purposes. And if the Littleton Water Department found a better water source somewhere else that more efficiently and more effectively gets water to the residents, and decides, we don't need this anymore, they'd go through a process of unwinding, and the status quo as it exists today is maintained. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay.
And if you'll indulge, I'd like to ask one more and even potentially more far-fetched hypothetical.
Through the chair, only one more. I'm kidding.
No. I do recognize it's late, so I won't push this any further.
No, that's okay. Whatever.
But I appreciate your patience as I understand what's going on here.
Sure. It's critically important that everybody understand this.
Corey, I understand we would like to access surface water out of Nagog potentially, but maybe that's never going to happen. Do the current easements on this property, that is 9 and 10 and the area in general, would those current easements allow for the construction of a water treatment plant in this specific location, or are they specifically to just the pumping infrastructure?
The easements are limited in their area, so that would be the main, driver there, I guess. So I don't think the language limits whether it's a pumping station versus a treatment plant, but a treatment plant would typically be larger than what the easement area currently allows. So if we determined that we needed a full-blown treatment plant at the location, then I guess that's a question for Jason. If the water department ends up with control of the zone 1, how does that relate to the easement that's already existing there for water infrastructure? Are we still limited to that easement, or are we able to then build outside of that easement as long as we go through the appropriate channels as far as like an order of conditions?
I guess that's exactly what I'm asking, Corey. Could you guys sign your own, modification of your easement, and that would make me a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Effectively, the easement interest doesn't go away, but the easement interest, it's my understanding after conversations with the DEP and EEA, was not sufficient to vest the requisite control in the water department to be able to carve that out, because it wasn't a zone 1 easement. And I'm looking for it right now just to to be able to give you a more specific answer as to what it does allow you to do. But there was some question as to whether that easement would merge into the conservation restriction, and my general premise is that it would not, because it's a different interest. There are easement characteristics inherent in a conservation restriction, but it's not an easement at the end of the day. So whatever easement rights I believe the Littleton Water Department has, they will continue to have. And I think in the conservation restriction, we'll probably make that clear so that there is no argument of merger.
And to the extent that that easement needed to be modified, Mr. Panos, who would need to, assuming that any modification is outside of the 100-foot buffer zone for the pond itself, which is itself fundamentally the Wetlands Protection Act, who would need to approve the modifications to that easement, and what process would it go through?
Corey, refresh my memory because I can't put my fingers on it, but what parcel is the easement on?
10 and 11.
It's on 10 and 11. Okay, right. Benefited and subject to a water supply easement, which was built into the taking. All right, my memory is clarified now. It's the town. The town would have to modify the easement, and it would have to go through town meeting approval. If you gave more rights, this would be my argument, and I always try to take the straight line approach, the quickest way to the end result. My argument would be that if you're not granting any more rights than the easement generally granted in the first place, but you're just modifying the language to clarify something, then my guess is you wouldn't have to go back to town meeting. But generally, if you are altering the easement such that you are granting more rights, you'll have a town meeting process, and you may even have an Article 97 process, depending on whether you trigger that change of use. So yeah, there's a process in place.
I think Joe Layden has had his hand up for a while. Hey, Joe.
Hi.
I'm gonna let you weigh in.
Thanks. Corey, just so you know, you got the short end of the straw. Nick finished about an hour and 15 minutes ago with the select board meeting.
I should have gone to that one.
How did that go?
5-minute discussion, sorry. So I just wanted to let everyone know that tonight the board did vote to approve the warrant articles for submission to the warrant. Of course, as you all know, that doesn't mean that's the end. We still have to prepare the special town meeting report. We're going to be working on that over the next 2 weeks. So if there is language recommendations coming from the Conservation Commission, it would be great to be able to have that included. Second thing is that just wanted to let you know that tomorrow at 9:30, we do have a Zoom call with town council as well as Corey and their team to go over the article language that was submitted. So town council is in the process of reviewing and finalizing. So just wanted to give that as an update.
Thanks, that's helpful.
That's 9:30 a.m.?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be tough to make. Okay. I guess I'm kind of just going back to this Article 97 as Corey, was very much present for. We had quite the discussion around Article 97. And again, like the language of it, we have to certify that we don't need the land for conservation purposes. And, the language that we had to use at that point was a little uncomfortable, but, the reason for doing it, the need to treat the water and, the restoration of the parcel across the street, which is closer to the resource area, for me, it was clearly something that made sense. I don't like the language that we had to use in the Article 97 because as this conversation has kind of meandered, it is clear that, this land, shouldn't be, overly used. It's in a sensitive area, near Cobb Pond. And so I do think, we need to take a close look at whatever language, and we can't predict who's going to be, when Corey's going to retire, and it's going to be a whole different slate of people. And so despite the best interests of the people in the room right now, I do feel strongly that to the extent we can do so, we need to put stopgaps in place, so that land that is intended for conservation and is intended to protect our aquifers sometime down the line doesn't inadvertently become, lakeside housing or something to that effect, because, we didn't put things in place that we could have. I know I keep hearing the term about unwinding the process, and I don't know exactly what those steps are. I have a real good understanding of aquifer protection. I don't understand what the unwinding process is. And so to that extent, I would ask that, we look at the language and, where it makes sense to do so, that we put stopgaps in place so that, as the use of this land evolves, let's say that maybe the radon becomes too big of an issue, or there's some new, unforeseen contaminant 20 years from now. I think if we're, I'm in general supportive, because I think, it's a good use, and the intent is there, but it's also, the land is valuable. It's always going to be valuable. And I think I think we need to honor the intent to keep the land, to protect the environment in perpetuity. So I would just ask, to the extent we can do so with the language we're using now, that we do that.
Julie, are you proposing essentially a final sentence to the article that says, if this land ceases to be used as a zone 1, then, and fill in the blank, then some predetermined thing happens, instead of just leaving it purely to that somewhat nebulous unwinding process?
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
if I could help inform that a little bit and hopefully give a little more comfort and context. So one observation I made in looking at the plans is most of the Zone 1 area, particularly on the portion of the land that would be susceptible to becoming some lakefront property, that being the property owned by private individuals, is bordering vegetated wetland. And then once you get into lot 11 and 10, that looks like it's primarily bordering vegetated wetland or buffer area. And then you get into lot 9, and that to less of an extent, but lot 9 is town owned. And then you get to the Littleton Conservation Trust land, and a big swath of it, I mean, most of it, I would say, is bordering vegetated wetland or buffer area. So the circumstances on the ground, I think, give some level of protection that you're looking for. The second point I might make to give you a little more comfort is all the unwinding of the Zone 1 conservation restriction, if it goes away at all, would maintain the status quo as it exists today with the layers of conservation restrictions that are already there. Those don't go away.
That's not strictly true. That even if the Zone 1 goes away, the care, custody, and control doesn't come back to the Conservation Commission.
That's correct.
So can we do that?
Except if I write within the warrant article in the determination that particularly outside of the Zone 1 area, the Conservation Commission would continue in its rights of management and control outside of the Zone 1, and certainly, you know, as holder of the conservation restriction, would continue in its stewardship as a holder. You know, I can definitely draft that in there if that's acceptable to Corey. But that's right. I mean, the care, custody, and control. So you're right. The management and control for conservation purposes would be relinquished back to the town for general municipal purposes, at least with regard to the Zone 1 area on lots 10 and 11.
I guess what we can put it another way.
Yeah.
If this were not being transferred for aquifer purposes, I don't believe the commission would agree to
Sure.
transfer care, custody, and control of the land because of, you know, the nature of the land and the mission of the Conservation Commission.
Sure.
So the Zone 1, I think, is really, you know, one of the very few reasons. There may be others. I know it's getting late, so I'm not thinking of others at the moment. But this is the reason why we would agree to this. And I'm really honestly sensitive to what we just experienced regarding the Article 97, you know, and playing the role that we are supposed to play, you know, and cooperating, you know, we cooperate with the select board all the time, as well as the water department, of course, you know, and are supportive. But from an Article 97 standpoint, I'm sensitive to how the state might view our commission, and that we're doing our due diligence and, you know, doing what we're supposed to be doing as a conservation commission, consistent with our mission. So those are the things, that's where I'm coming from. Those are the things I'm thinking about. So if it's easy enough to just say, here's why we're doing this, because this is why we're doing this article that are, the Zone 1 Aquifer Protection. That is why we're doing this. And we at least I think it's a worthy thing to do. We've, supported the water department in the past for these very reasons. But this is the reason, and I don't think we would sign it away, for another undetermined reason in the future. So I feel strongly it needs to come back to us if.
Sure. Is the concern, Julie, that the town would somehow convey the property out to some non-town entity?
Or use it for active recreation, like install a beach, or something, or do something else to it. I mean, this is not a large pond. So, some other use that may impact the environment, or the water quality. There are ways to undo a CR, there are ways to undo, a lot of things. And, relying on having the same or similar regulatory environment in the future, I'd like to think that we would still maintain strong environmental protections, but I'm sure as well as I do that there are plenty of interests that, are not a fan of environmental regulations and protections. So again, I think if we can just put it in there that it's still protected in perpetuity, even if this use is no longer necessary, I just feel as though that would be what we should do as a commission to help protect the original interest of this land being in conservation in the first place.
I agree, Julie. I'd certainly like to ask Corey and Jason if they would be willing to take it back to their boards, or board, I guess. And contemplate that scenario of if the zone 1, if the pumping ceases, could we include transition back to care, custody, and control of the Conservation Commission?
Yeah, I think from a conceptual level, where the water commissioners would be fine with that. It's just a matter of working with Jason on the mechanism to do that. The language that would need to be required in there. So I'm sure we can figure something out.
Yeah, definitely. And again, we're not doing anything that's inconsistent with the current status quo, for example. What you're proposing isn't inconsistent with the current status quo. So, for example, the Littleton Conservation Trust holds a conservation restriction, which is, this is nomenclature that we created internally as we were working through and trying to make sense of all of these 5 conservation restrictions. So there's this so-called primary conservation restriction that's held by the Littleton Conservation Trust, which, among the many purposes, is for the protection of significant areas of wetlands, for water and soil conservation, for the preservation of potential future water supplies for the town. And that conservation restriction is over lots 9, 10, 11, 13, and 14. And then there's another one. Well, that's the main one, and that's been amended to add a passive recreational activity allowance, amending that conservation restriction, again, within the zone 1, and passive activities that are probably consistent with what the limits of what you would allow in any event. So again, what you're asking for is not inconsistent with what's there already. It's just trying to figure out, probably with town's council, how care and management gets vested back to the Conservation Commission if this gets unwound. And you would really be putting it back in the status quo. In other words, the pre-existing condition, as existed at the time of the prior to the grant of the conservation restriction for zone 1 purposes. So I'm not sure what that mechanism is, but I'm sure we can figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be sure to bring it up tomorrow in our meeting with town council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the one at 9:30?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's another hand up, Don.
Yeah, I see one more hand up.
And I wanted to make a couple comments too, but let
Okay.
Don go.
Okay, go ahead, Don.
Yes, yeah, I've been involved with this since the very beginning when Savas Danis was involved. And I think one thing well, there are a couple things. There's some corrections and some comments. Way back when this was conceived and before the water department bought the land, they had saw the conservation restrictions. In fact, conservation restrictions had various contingencies about what if the water department were to buy the land. And a lot of those have been ignored. And when it was bought, the purpose of it was to compensate for the water department's taking of Oak Hill to put in a second water pipe and access road. And as you may know, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is through the National Park Service, funds Oak Hill. But it was decided that if the water department bought this, and I was in the meeting with Savas Danis, who of course has retired, much like Julie Roop has speculated that the manager retires and things change. He was there and was the Division of Conservation Services that approves all the conservation trusts, all the conservation restrictions. And it's decided that if the water department bought this, to compensate for the taking on Oak Hill, the lots on 10 and 11, where the wells are, would be given to the Conservation Commission under their care, control, and custody. So that was one aspect, and this seems almost like a taking of a taking. So I point that out. But nonetheless, we went ahead, and actually my signatures are all on the conservation restrictions. So, yeah, we've been trying to work with the water department. And the last we've heard was a MIPA meeting about this, and various things were raised there. But nothing has been shared. Well, we've been sharing documents, but no plan has been produced until last week. And this is, sort of a big gap. But at the MIPA meeting, which was attended by Corey and Attorney Jason, it was mentioned that you've been working with us for 4 or 5 years. And what's another year? You do this in 1 year. Now you're trying to cram this in 2 months, and it's very complicated, more complicated than I think a lot of people recognize. And I've gone through all the documents over and over again. And I'll just quickly point out some aspects of it. So at the MIPA meeting, it was Jason's first day on the job. So, I was trying to figure out what's going on. And we've originally had suggested an overlaid CR on a very complicated set of CRs. In fact, the most complicated I've seen, the most complicated that other people that worked for the state had seen. Not an easy task. And I had proposed a different idea, which is we have the conservation restrictions, we amend them appropriately and clean up what's there. As it was mentioned, these are 20 years old. Since then, things have been built out. It's fully built out. We know the situation, no moving parts. Some things need to be cleaned up, especially the parts that talked about the water department accessing this land and what should happen. I should also point out that the water department's in violation of the CR because they came in and dumped a lot of heavy rocks all throughout the wet area to allow heavy equipment to come in. So what that did, and then that was explicitly prohibited in the current CR. So they've been out of compliance with the CR for 10, 15 years, ever since soon after you bought it, and Savas had mentioned that was a mistake. That also has forced other things to be detoured. So even the Conservation Trust putting down the Memorial Trail, which is a big thing for the Cobbs when this was done, that's out of compliance. So there's no mention of how that's going to be remediated or fixed. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that does need to be dealt with. Now, just to deal with the presentation, you mentioned lots 13 and 14, the two owned by private landowners, Fiato and Pylon, have a conservation restriction on them by the Conservation and Commission. The Commission does not have any conservation restriction there. It's just the Conservation Trust. Mentioned, and on the west side of the pond where it says town, which is the Conservation Commission owning that, that was bought, and there's a CR on it, and that was bought with a CPA funding, which mandates a CR. That, I think there's some issues. The real issues in all the CRs that have been put in place that does not allow subordination. You talk about doing an A&R, that's prohibited. That's been boilerplates and CRs for decades. So, you know, those options I don't think are there. And I say this trying to work with the water department, making this make sense. You know, we want to make sense here, but I think you have to fall within the rules. Now, one of the things that's sort of interesting is you see Cobb Pond Associates listed in the Cobb Pond. There's no mention about that CR whatsoever. Now, that pond is owned by all the owners of the 18 lots there, which some have been turned to conservation, but you have private landowners there, and they control that. They would like to give that to the town. That might solve some of the water department's problems, but they also deal with weed control. Now, you look at your Zone 1 radii of protections, you're going to protect one half of the pond and not the other half, and what gets done in one part of the pond floats into the other. I don't think your DEP is going to go for that. I think you need to show better control, and you don't address that at all. I should also point out that Amy and I have attended homeowner associations because owning a lot there means we go there. The residents there are not very happy with the water department, especially with their dropping all this jagged, loose rock on the access, which is on lot 10, but nonetheless, it makes it hard to use. You can't walk on it. So I don't see, you haven't even talked to those people. I don't see how you could get those on board in 2 weeks. So, I mean, this is reality. I think you have to look at it. So also originally town council had put something together, Tom Harrington and staff, an associate, saying that, oh, everything's already protected because it's sort of the functional thing, sort of the almost the arguments you're hearing. As we know, Mass DEP rejected it explicitly. So, yeah, I think there's some issues here. So, I mean, that's just brushing over a bit, but, you know, the only time anyone who's seen this come out of the water department has been last week to the Conservation Trust at their request, and you know, tonight at both the board of selectmen who adopted this very fuzzy thing as a placeholder, as a warrant article, and what you're hearing tonight. It's complicated. It's not an easy issue to resolve. I think this needs to be worked out over more and be figured out better. And I think the water department would do well to withdraw it and not build up negative reaction, which I'm sure is going to happen at town meeting, especially with those landowners who are not very happy with what's happened yet. And yeah, with the Conservation Commission having care, control, and custody of lot 10, 11, you're on violation of the conservation restriction, which prohibits putting down gravel, let alone all this loose rock. So there's some issues to be worked out. This is not simple. And I suggest what we should do is work on this together. And you know, what are you going to do about Cobb Pond Associates, where, you know, you have 3 protective zones from the Zone 1 protective areas that overlay it, and you haven't even addressed it. And finally, I think the Conservation Commission should have a walk. We need sidewalks to see what's here and see what the issues are. I think it can be worked out, but I don't think you're going to do this in 2 months. That's it.
So there's a lot of issues brought up just there. I'm not sure if we have time to address all of them in detail. But I'll just mention that the existing water supply easement allowed the activity that has taken place so far. So I don't believe there's any violation of anything there. It allowed access, so that's why the trap rock was put down for the construction vehicle access in there and all that sort of stuff that you mentioned there. And then as far as, pulling everything off in 2 weeks, as you mentioned, all we need to do in the short term here is get the town meeting article finalized and voted on. And that doesn't really involve the other private landowners, the town meeting article. It's more the subsequent conservation restriction, obviously, that we need to involve them. But so there's no real rush at the last minute with those folks. The reason that we focused on Conservation Trust last week and the Conservation Commission this week is because those are the parties that are really impacted by the town meeting vote itself. I'm not sure I can even remember all the other issues that were just brought up, but maybe at a separate meeting we could go over all of those things. But I would reemphasize that the Conservation Trust meeting last week, that there were really no significant concerns from any of those members. And that was they seemed very much on board with the approach we were taking here.
I think the one thing that concerns me that I would want to hear a little more about, and I think, Corey, you and I aren't going to be able to answer or hash it out or figure it out tonight, is the assertion that the existing CRs can't be subordinate. So if they can't be, that removes a level of protection that I think we are relying on. So I would love to hear like a little more clarification on that one from town council, just to figure out what the solution is.
And I can address that. I believe that's absolutely an error. They can be subordinate. And if the respective holders agree to subordinate, they will be subordinated. There is no prohibition that from the holders of those restrictions from subordinating. In fact, the Zone 1 model template requires it. And the reason why we're not going through the existing conservation restrictions, and amending them to conform to the Zone 1 requirements is because that's hyper complicated. And this is a much easier path to accomplish virtually the same thing. So
this is the easier path? Wow. I'd hate to go that other way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
This is the easier path. And believe me, I struggled working with Corey over the summer to take that approach, and it just wasn't feasible. And what it ultimately resulted in was actually throwing out one of the conservation restrictions, that so-called primary, and totally amending and restating it in its entirety. And we just decided that, what's in those conservation restrictions is important enough to maintain, that, the current holders shouldn't be in any way deprived of modifications to them, that we can accomplish everybody's goals by creating this new master CR. And there already is, by the way, a primary CR. So Mr. MacGyver is absolutely wrong to suggest that the others can't be subordinated to what we're proposing, because the other ones are already subordinated to a master.
Would it be correct here to say, though, that the state will ultimately be the arbiter of this? And Mr. Penno, so I don't mean to sound disrespectful here, but if you're wrong, it's your butt on the line, right? And with your client, right? And the state bounces it back and says, no, we're not signing off on this structure. right? Ultimately, the state signs off on the whole CR structure before anything goes forward. Is that
That's correct.
reasonably accurate at a high level?
Yes, and this will go through 2 layers of vetting, more for the substance of the CR than the structure of the, subordinations and so forth. I've already talked with the attorney for the DEP who is on board with this. We're engaging in conversations with the EEA so it does go through 2 levels of review. I do believe at the end of the day, because this structure is an easier way to accomplish the same thing, which ultimately is vesting control over the Zone 1 aquifer in the Littleton Water Department. That's really what we're talking about here. That ultimately everybody will be on board. But you're right, it goes through a process at the state level.
So what's the next step? I mean, I don't think we're ready to, we don't have language in front of us to vote on.
Right. Yeah, I think so. We'll have that meeting with town council tomorrow and probably a couple of follow-up meetings, I would imagine, after that over the next couple of weeks to iron out all of the language. And
So
I would,
continue. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would suggest a request that maybe we come back at your next meeting, which I assume is probably the 27th.
It is, yeah, 27th.
Maybe we come back then and at that point we'll have that language essentially finalized, I believe. So I think it needs to be finalized that night for the select board to approve the final language before it goes off to be printed.
Right.
So I don't know if
Corey, will that language have to be approved by your commissioners before it comes to us? Where do your commissioners fit into that process?
Yeah, I don't believe there's anything other than the typical, they're proposing the town meeting article and support it. So they would take that vote. But as far as approving the final language, I don't believe they need to approve that. So obviously we communicate with members of the commission on a regular basis about what's happening here, but they leave the actual drafting of the language up to us and our council.
I guess what I was going to suggest there is, to the extent that your commissioners have questions or concerns about what we've relayed, I think Julie and I have vocalized that more than others, but in general, I don't know, Julie, if we want to select someone from the Conservation Commission to make them available to the water commissioners, if that would be helpful to them. But that person might be speaking to some extent with the voice of the Conservation Commission, so it shouldn't be, it should probably be a vote if that was going to be the case.
I'm not sure if I have time, but I could also try to put some of the commission's comments into a memo before the 9:30 call tomorrow.
Geez,
You don't have time. You've got 11 hours and 24 minutes.
Yeah,
What are you talking about?
and I think we're only on our 8:15 hearing, so.
And I have an 8:30 meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't.
Amy, I don't think you need to do that. Corey heard our concerns. So,
Yeah, I'll be sure to bring them up on the meeting tomorrow. And if you all would like to designate someone to be in more frequent communication with us over the next couple of weeks, that would be awesome. Just to make sure that we do sufficiently address all of the concerns before the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And through the chair, I can have a draft determination that I spoke about to you guys for review by the end of the week.
Okay. Yeah, I think as much as we can see documents, ahead of time is helpful.
Absolutely.
And can I throw out 2 more comments that don't really need a response now?
Sure.
The assessor's maps or the assessor's card show Lot 9 is co-owned by Conservation Commission. I know you guys have done a much deeper dive than I have, but just want to double check that.
Lot 9. Hold on.
We're gonna
Lot
have
9
to.
is owned by the town.
The assessor's map say co-owned by conservation, but we can figure that out later. And my only other comment was that I assume EEA is okay with the town, whatever board owning the property, as well as another part of the town holding the CR, because I thought they didn't like that at all.
Well, the EEA prefers one of two mechanisms. Are you talking about for the water department to assume ownership?
Just in general, I didn't think that a town could own property as well as hold the CR.
And that's true. They cannot. It's not legal.
Not enough. The water department is separate enough that EEA is fine with that. Just a comment.
Yeah, when we met with the EEA, they were fine with that. So
that's right.
That was it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess it would be good to, confirm that's the case. That someone with authority is able to say that. Okay. So I think we'll, continue this conversation to our next hearing. Any documents you can send to us for review ahead of time are really helpful. It's extremely hard to vote on language or documents that we don't see ahead of time.
Yep.
So just those couple of things, and
the next hearing is September 27th.
Yep.
Corey, I'll get you the determination, and I assume you'll disperse it.
Yep, I can do that.
Circulate it accordingly. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all for your time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Meet all of you.
Okay. Holy moly.
Appoint somebody to be in contact with the water department before we move off.
Oh, yep. I nominate Chase.
Yeah.
I was afraid that might happen. I'm happy to do it.
It was your suggestion.
Yeah, I know. I know. That's what I get for opening my mouth.
Essentially raising your hand.
Is that what that was? Because I think you misinterpreted it.
I know.
That's fine. I would. I'm not sure if happily is the right word, but happily do that.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess, do we need to vote on that as a commission? I mean, I did nominate Chase. Do we need a second and a vote that Chase can interface with the water department? Okay. If there's any discussion or concern.
All right. Should we do the roll call?
Yep.
Okay.
Somebody second that? Are you actually making a motion? Oh, thank you.
All right. So we've got Chase.
Aye.
Julie.
Julie Rupp, aye.
Brian.
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Sarah.
Sarah Seward, aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous.
Right, great. Okay. So moving on, 8:30 hearing, Reuben Horror Library, red line change for tree removal. So is anybody here? I see Mark here. I don't know if we have anybody else here to speak to that one.
And myself.
Oh, Joe. Okay, great. Okay.
Sorry, Joe.
Go ahead.
Brian Force is on the call too, from the OPM
I
from
see.
Vertex.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll probably just kick it off first, since I had heard at the last meeting, one of the questions that you all had was really where some of this request was coming for removal of the trees. In consulting with our tree warden as well as DPW director, especially now that some of the final grades are being established for the library, From a staff perspective, we're concerned about specifically the oak that is more leaning towards the building. Now with sort of its group mates being reduced in number, so it's a clump of 5 to 6 varying caliper trees. We're concerned the one that is reaching over the what I guess would be the western elevation of the library would potentially lead to future damage, and we'd like to remove that potential hazard from that area of trees that was protected by through the Conservation Commission's order of conditions. Of course, because it is the largest tree that's out there, you know, there's always concern as far as potentially damaging additional trees in that area. It would require a crane to come in there in order to remove that tree. And the tree warden is in the process of getting quotes for trees that need to be removed around town, including one on conservation land that would actually require a crane to be used. So we're looking to try to, over the next month, try to group some of these things together. That would be sort of an ideal time to try to remove this tree. So that's the primary request. They did indicate there was a second tree that, while leaning towards the library, is probably less of a immediate issue. You know, and there was discussion as far as, you know, being able to identify a tree or two as mitigation in place of the removal of that tree. So I'd welcome Brian or Mark to add in anything else. We visited the site. When did it last rain that we were stuck in the rain, Amy?
Thursday. We were there on Thursday.
Yeah, to take a look and to have some sort of consensus as far as the nature of the removal request.
Can I just ask a clarifying question before Mark or Brian jump in? How many trees are we talking about now? Sounds like 1 or 2.
Correct.
So I'm really freaking confused here, guys. We started out with 1 tree, we got up to like 5, and now we're back to 2.
So Chase, there's 6 trees in the cluster. There's a fairly large oak, probably 8 to 10 inch caliper tree would be my guess. I didn't actually measure it. There's a smaller pine tree not too far from it, well, smaller in caliper. And then there's another oak tree that's probably 6 inch caliper tree that is also leaning. So there's 3 other trees in the 6 to 8 inch range, probably, that are closer to the fire road. At one point, the idea from the tree warden was to take out all 6 trees. When we visited the site on Thursday, it's believed that the larger tree that is leaning probably needs to come out. The pine is questionable whether it needs to come out. And then there's that oak tree that is the smaller oak tree. I guess it must be number 2 there, that is leaning, but it's not clear that it's leaning towards the building or behind the building. That probably could be trimmed, right? But it would need a professional to come in and say whether you're leaving enough. If you trim there's a branch that extends towards the building. If you trim that branch, is there still enough of the tree left that it will be a viable tree? So it's that basically on that diagram, it's the tree 1, 2, and the dot between them is the pine tree.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
And personally, from my perspective and the library's perspective, we'd like to save as many of the trees as we possibly can, because we think that they add a lot to the site. So I'm sad that any of them have to come out, but I can understand the concern with 1 because it does have a definite lean to it. I don't think the lean is anything related to the construction. I think it's just grew that way, but if there's concern that it could fall and hit the building, then maybe something has to be done.
Yeah, Mark, when we did our site walk, I think prior to when you went, and it does look like the tree grew that way. And when there was more of a slope there, it didn't quite look as alarming. But just a point of clarification, we and I think you were there, I think during our last meeting, we had just expressed that the BMPs for construction in the vicinity of the critical root zone, perhaps it was followed when the snow fence was up, but when we were on site, it was very clear that construction activities had occurred, grading and driving equipment just occurred very, very close to the critical root zone of the trees. So just to clarify, that was kind of where we landed during our last meeting.
Thank you for that, Julie. I did go back through, I wasn't prepared enough at the previous meeting to go through my documents, but we did have the snow fence up around the cluster of trees per the contract documents up until the month of July. And that's when final grading started to take place. And then obviously that's probably when the dozer and some of the equipment were getting too close to that, to the drip line around those trees.
I'll say the same thing I said a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this. To the extent that we're talking about the one tree that has a substantial lean or a second tree, I'm fine with this. Maybe there should be some replacement plantings, but I would leave that to more experienced members of the commission. But I have no problem taking out a couple. I do have a problem taking out that whole cluster.
I think, unfortunately, one of the things you see when you have, a forest of trees and then it's reduced to clusters, the trees are less stable in a cluster, and then to the extent that you remove, more trees within a smaller cluster, the trees just get less and less stable, and so you see failure. You see more failure quicker. So that's that's a factor, and I do recognize the risk, but I do think I think some replacement is warranted, because I think clearly the construction BMPs were not followed once the snow fence was removed.
So just for clarification, let's assume that we just have to take out, if we just take out that one large leaning tree, what are we talking about for replacement?
So I think, Amy, did we provide Brian, I think before, with some recommendations about tree replacement? And how to determine, based on the caliber of tree.
Well, Matt Cahill has sent over the stuff from.
Yeah.
I haven't circulated that.
Okay. And I think the other thing we had talked about was pollinator gardens too. I thought we were going to leave that up to, recommendation from, from the library.
So on the pollinator gardens, Amy and I had discussions about this before. So I would like to actually table more on the pollinator gardens until more towards next spring timeframe. And the reason is that the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, usually they have these annual grants that we can apply for, and we could apply for a grant around a pollinator garden potentially next spring, and we can look and see what we can get from that. If we don't get a grant, I can't commit that the trustees would put up money to help, but we do have trust funds. We could help do more with pollinator gardens and things. We're very interested in partnering with Amy in the conservation along those lines. I just don't know that now is necessarily the time to start that, right? It'd be nice to be in the building and figure out what we need before we try and put more restrictions on. I'm not trying to pass the buck on any of this, but it's just, we're having a hard enough time getting in the building, let alone figuring out what all the next steps are.
I think if there's a grant on the horizon, you know, I wouldn't have a problem with exploring that when that's available, you know, to make better use of the money. You know, oak trees, I think I'm beating a dead horse here for some people, but you know, the oak trees are the most valuable tree, you know, in our area for habitat and resource value. You know, so it is a significant loss. You know, we did, I mean, you know, I know Mark, you were there, and you know, we did a lot of work on, you know, trying to fit the design into the environment, you know, and working on, you know, minimizing the disturbance. You know, so I'm just a little disappointed that the construction, you know, some of the BMPs weren't followed from that standpoint, you know, just knowing that we're in a sensitive environment. Yeah, I think in general, the, you know, library is a great asset to the town and has, you know, come out really nicely. But I do feel we need to replace, if we're taking down a big oak, you know, we need to do some sort of replacement. You know, and if it was a concern, you know, before, surely driving the construction vehicles over it makes it quite a bit worse.
Yeah, I agree with you that we should probably replace the trees. I'm not sure that I agree that necessarily that this is a result, that a lot of the problems we're discussing now are a result of the construction, right? The construction crew being negligent or anything. I have no problem replacing the trees. I agree we should do that, right? And we'll follow whatever recommendations you guys come up with for replacing the trees as best we can. I do think we also need to coordinate with the fire department on replacing the trees, just to make sure that wherever we put the trees isn't in conflict with whatever the fire department needs for access, since they will be towards the fire road side of the building. And I hate to see those trees come out. I really do. I was disappointed with how many trees we had to take out for the construction to begin with. But I understand that's, you know, just the cost of doing business on a lot of these things. So we can work on trying to follow whatever recommendations you guys have. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to point it to say that they were negligent in construction. That's my only comment, because I think even if they did everything to the spirit of what you were requesting, we'd still be having this exact same conversation now, right? Because that tree's not leaning because of the construction; it's just leaning, right?
So, Amy, can you provide the what Matt Cahill had sent as far as recommendations for tree replacement?
Yeah, I can definitely send that up, but I think this is what, a 24-inch DBH.
It's a big
I don't think there's room, because I think what Matt sent along is basically if it's 24-inch DBH, then you need 6 4-inch DBH trees, you know, to make up 24 inches. There's not room for that. There's probably room for 1, maybe 2. And there's a discussion about whether or not you would want to put another oak back in there, which is slow growing, but to now pose a thing smaller, and that has, you know, frankly, a smaller lifespan and less damaging, like, you know, a shad bush or some birches or something like that. you go a number of directions on the replacement.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm just hearing Matt in my head, right tree, right place. So that does make sense. Okay. So perhaps something that isn't going to get as large, but
why don't I circle around with Brian and I assume maybe Brian, your landscape architect in the fire department, and see what we come up with in terms of what could even fit down there.
Yeah, I can coordinate that if you can send that document out.
Can we just put the responsibility here on Amy to make a determination? I mean, I think she knows our general approach here and is probably best equipped to make these decisions in real time and keep this moving forward.
And we need to have discussions, but I'll tell you, I'm kind of leaning towards what'll fit down there is maybe a couple trees and a shrub or two.
Some lilacs, maybe? I heard Julie really liked
I know I can get some of those. But I'm happy to do that.
yeah, I think that's fine. I think we're kind of going around in circles. I think we did talk about the landscape architect last week. I think if we have, I think Amy is certainly capable of providing that advice. We have Matt Cahill as well to bounce things off of if we need to. So that's okay with me. I don't know if other commissioners have comments or concerns.
Sounds good.
No, I like that. I think it's the
good.
most
Sounds good.
efficient, reasonable way.
So what would the vote right now be for basically a red line change? Is it for removing one tree or removing up to 3 trees?
I would say removing up to 3 trees, but contingent upon you sort of blessing it as the conservation agent.
And I think we're all in support of the number 1 tree that has to go, and then go from there, Amy. So up to 3.
Yeah, so it'd be the potentially worst case, if you will, 2 oaks, 1 pine.
Yep.
Okay.
Right. But they've got to convince you in the field that pruning the crown on that oak would ultimately be detrimental to it, or otherwise bring it down.
Okay. So do we need a vote, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd entertain a motion.
It would be to approve that removal as a red line change under the order of conditions.
Move to approve the removal of up to 3 trees, 2 oak and a pine at the discretion of the conservation agent as a red line change on the order of conditions.
Second.
And replacement with advice on replacement trees.
Right, and the conservation agents approving the replacement plan developed by the applicant and their landscape architect.
All right, Andrew, you're gonna, it sound like Sarah seconded. Gonna do the roll call.
So Chase.
Chase, aye.
Julie.
Julie Rupp, aye.
Brian.
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Sarah.
Sarah Seward, aye.
And myself, aye. It's unanimous.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you all.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Only 3 more to go if you want to stick around.
With that, I have
Already
to say
gone.
good night. I have
Good
to
luck,
say
Amy.
good night.
Okay.
Good night, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. I gotta go.
Night, Sarah.
Thanks,
Night,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Night.
All right. Looks like we're on 8:45. Continued public hearing, notice of intent, 6A Grimes Lane, construction of new single-family dwelling and associated work. And it's like Mark is here.
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, good evening. Been a long night for you guys, so I'll try and make it quick. Lot 6 is a notice of intent that we filed a few months ago, and the commission went out and looked at the drainage ditch and determined that that area was a jurisdictional wetland. Norse Environmental went out and reflagged it. It's my understanding the commission has not had a chance to go back out and review the flags, but what I've done is plotted them up, and just to give you an overview of how that's affecting this lot, was able to slide the house over so that the house itself is out of the 50-foot no disturb zone. But in order to construct the house and have a little bit of yard area, I'd like to entertain allowing up to a 30-foot buffer zone as opposed to 50-foot, with the recognition that this area in the past has always been mowed and always been disturbed. And as a result of it not being mowed this year and probably a portion of last year, the wetland vegetation was able to emerge. So this is more of a discussion. I know we can't really do much of anything until after the commission is out and confirms the wetland line, but I just thought I'd run that idea by you, by the commission, with respect to a waiver request for the reduction in buffer zone.
So I guess I would say take a real close look at our waiver requirements. I'm having trouble fitting that request into our regs. So I would take a look at those and try to determine what, like where it would fit in the requirements. You know, mowing a meadow is a little different from a manicured lawn, and the chemicals that typically would go into, you know, a manicured lawn area. You know, and if wetland vegetation is growing, it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't make it not wetland vegetation, and just because it's mowed.
Well, it was up until this recent site walk, it was considered non-jurisdictional. So we were kind of surprised when it was determined to be jurisdictional. So now we're kind of backtracking a little bit. Is there another type of, rather than manicured lawn, is there another type of ground cover that would be acceptable, or would we just be obligated to restore it to its natural condition?
So the meadow condition that it's in is a common thing that we, you know, that we see.
Well, if it was just the meadow, could we continue to mow it, at least that portion of it, as opposed to having a manicured lawn? And just delineate that portion.
So typically we would see it mowed like once a year. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, maintain it the way it has been maintained, but everything outside of that area, outside of the blue line, we would just let grow natural and not mow it.
So why, I guess so you just want to maintain it the way it is and mow it once a year?
Is that a possibility? I mean, I suppose if we look at it in one respect, we have been mowing it once a year all along. I don't see any reason why we couldn't continue to do that. Is that correct?
So it's supposed to be a 50-foot no disturb. I guess I think I would need to see what, you know, what the purpose is, and, you know, if it's transferred to the new owner, you know, that they wouldn't start brush hogging it or, you know, continuing to mow it. But I mean, some of the ways that we maintain some of the land is exactly that, just to mow it once a year to keep invasives down, for example, if there are invasives encroaching. But I mean, no disturb is no disturb.
Right.
I'll tell you, Julie, I mean, I appreciate what you're suggesting here, and Julie, what you've laid out makes perfect sense in concept, but in practice, the whole freaking thing's just going to turn into manicured lawn.
Yep.
You know, like I'm not particularly interested in entertaining something that just gets abused in practice. And so my question back to you, Mark, is, you know, I understand we have lot lines here, but they're frankly, they're artificial constructs right now. What's happening to on the lot to the west?
Lot 7A.
7A, yeah.
Well, there's a house there now.
Is there a house there now? Okay.
Yeah, it's under construction.
Sorry, maybe I missed something. This is Anna. It says proposed house. This is not constructed yet, right?
Correct.
So what's stopping you from, since that wetland line changed, what's stopping you from shifting your design a little bit so it isn't right on the 50 and then you don't have to do the mowing? I don't understand why. Have you done an alternative analysis? Because that's what we would require if you went within the 50. We would require you to look at other designs to see if you can stay out of the 50.
I will review that with the builder tomorrow to see if he has any other designs that could fit on the lot better. But I just thought I'd run by you the concept of, you know, allowing a little bit of encroachment into that area, considering that it's always been, you know, mowed once a year and all that. But it sounds like I'm getting the instruction to just leave the 50 alone and maybe mow it once a year in the future.
Yeah,
Well,
it was
leave
mowed
it
once
alone
a year
without
before a
mowing.
homeowner was there.
Excuse me?
It was mowed once a year before you had a homeowner that moved in and is going to decide that they want a nice lawn around their house.
Yeah, I think one way to protect that would be to put some posts up with signs indicating that that area would be would only be mowed once a year. And we're also going to have the same situation on lot 5. So knowing how to proceed on this would help smooth out that notice of intent process too when that comes around. So.
Well, this is Anne again. I would question this because it wasn't a house area. What was it? It's a change of use. So I don't see why you have to continue mowing as if the former use is still in effect. You're changing the use, so I don't see why you would have to or presume to continue mowing there necessarily, because you know, that would be in a violation of our regs.
Well, it would be, if it was an annual mowing like has been occurring before, it really wouldn't be a violation because it's a continuing practice. And I think the only benefit to doing that would be for maintaining or preventing invasive species from encroaching into that area or developing within that area. That would be the only purpose. If the commission would prefer that it not get mowed, then I'll present that to the developer and see what he thinks.
Was it mowed for hay, or why was it mowed in the first place?
I really don't know the answer to that. I think it was just mowed for annual maintenance, but I don't know.
Well, if it was agricultural before, you know, and just not wanting to let a field go. I mean, clearly it was agricultural before and it's turning to residential.
Right. But I don't know what the purpose of the mowing was, whether it was some kind of a product they were producing, like hay or straw or whatever. I don't know the answer to that.
One thing I'm noticing too is the edge of the house is right on the 50.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wouldn't be able to get any equipment or any grading or erosion control. There would be no space to work.
Yeah, and this is, I mean,
conceptual.
I haven't, you have to excuse me because I haven't been before this commission before. So I wanted to have a little bit of dialogue before I presented
Absolutely.
a plan and say, this is what I want to do.
Yep.
Because I know we weren't going to be able to finish anything tonight's meeting anyway, because the next, you wouldn't be able to review the wetland flags until before the next meeting. So I just wanted to open up a dialogue to get a feel for how the commission feels about these things.
Yep. Yep. And that's part of why I'm, was bringing that up.
Okay.
And I think the initial advice to go to the letter of the wetlands bylaw regs, and in particular the waiver regs, will be very useful to you.
Yep.
And furthermore, I would emphasize that although our regs have a no disturb zone within 50, that doesn't mean 50 to 100 is a free for all. And I'm not super excited about what I'm looking at right here. So, yeah, alternatives analysis, as Anna put forward.
Okay. All right. Well, this is good feedback. I guess what I'll do is talk to the builder tomorrow and see what we come up with for an alternative, and resubmit to the commission, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
Okay. I will say I like the colors. It was easy to. I mean, that your figure was easy to read. Yeah, I do like the colors. So
well,
there's some feedback too.
I appreciate that.
No magenta.
Yeah, well, hopefully the heavy blue line will be outside of that thin dashed red line next time.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to give yourself a space to work and get your erosion controls up and that type of thing.
And does the commission want to do another site walk to look at the new flags as well as the flags over at 4A that got staked?
Yeah. Yeah, we should do that. I probably need to do that during the day, Amy. I'm onboarding new staff, so.
I'll send around an email and try to set something up.
Yeah, has Maureen reached out to you?
Yeah, she could. What do you think about this?
I think she said something about the week of the 20th.
I don't think she could do it next. No, it would be next week. We didn't have time to set something.
Oh, next week's easier.
I'll double check back with her and send an email and see who we can get.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I guess that's it for tonight, and we'll see you in what's that would be continued to the
27th.
27th. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Enjoy your evening. There's not much left of it. All right, moving on. Continued public hearing notice of intent, 23 Moore Lane septic system upgrade. I see Matt.
Happy almost Tuesday, guys.
Thanks, Matt. Go ahead.
Hey, lots of stuff going on. Okay, I'll make this really brief. Amy, if I could share my screen.
Please.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So essentially, I come before you guys with a notice of intent for the replacement of a septic system at 23 Moore Lane. We have, to recap, here is the 100-foot buffer zone. Here in yellow, you have your 50-foot BVW setback here. The commission requested two things. One, that the plans be put in color, which I had Evan do. The second was for a stockpile area on this side of the driveway. This area was specifically named. There's a straw wattle line here. There is wattles and silt fence proposed here. This septic system has been approved by the Board of Health. As this stockpile was within the 100-foot setback of the well, I did talk to Jim Gareffi to make sure he didn't have any issues, and he said no, it wasn't a big deal to him. So, I mean, that's basically it, guys.
Okay. Any commissioners have questions or comments? It looks like, from what I recall, what we asked for our last meeting.
Matt, I think we talked about this last meeting. Could you just confirm for me again that the stockpile area is not near any trees?
No, it's lawn here.
Okay.
Looks good to me based on the notes that I have and what I was looking for.
Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, entertain a motion.
Sorry, I missed the line. It's going right up a driveway. Did that say that how you're excavating alongside that driveway? That being replaced, repaired? Is it gravel? Did I not look at the plan? I'm trying to look at this real quick, sorry.
I'm sorry, you were cutting in and out.
The driveway, you're going to be excavating alongside the driveway?
There's a 5-foot overdig area alongside of the driveway. Yes.
Right. What's the driveway consist of right now?
Pavement.
Is it being replaced? Or?
No. No, it goes up to the line of the driveway. It won't go into the driveway. Let me see if I can put that back up. There you go.
Did you have more questions, Kyle? I think you're on mute if you were.
Sorry, I think that was it. I'm just trying to envision a 5-foot excavation along the edge of a asphalt driveway not causing problems.
Oh. Okay.
Need a motion?
I think so. If there aren't any other questions, I mean, it sounds like there's a concern over damage to the driveway, but I don't know that's really in our.
Yeah, it doesn't change. I'm more curious.
Yeah.
I mean, it is work that would happen inside the buffer if they end up having to bring in pavement and redo the driveway.
Right. So I guess we can make it clear that if, there's some sort of driveway repair, we would probably need to hear about that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely.
So I guess condition. Add that to the conditions.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Would entertain a motion if anyone, if you're ready, or other questions or comments.
I'll move to close the public hearing and issue an order of conditions for 23 Moore Lane, Mass DEP number 204939.
Second.
All right. Chase.
Chase, aye.
Julie.
Julie Rupp, aye.
Brian.
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
And myself, aye. It's unanimous.
All right, great.
Thank
Thanks,
you, ladies
Matt.
and gentlemen.
All right.
Have a wonderful night.
You too.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Good night.
No problem. Yeah.
All right. Last hearing. Oh my goodness. Open the 9:05 hearing.
They did not get the DEP file number, so just roll it along.
So what?
We can just continue it to the 27th.
Okay, that works for me.
Okay.
Is that it for the agenda? I don't, let's see, just scroll down now. Okay, so everything else is continued. Oh, except we have, all right.
I mean, we could talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes if you want.
You're more than capable.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I guess, are there,
Your call, you can put everything else off to the next meeting, including the minutes. I do just need, at a minimum, an actual vote to support the funding request to the Community Preservation Committee for the Cloverdale and Town Forest Boardwalk.
okay, and that's a request to request funding?
Yes, which has actually already been put in, but for the town meeting warrant, they just need a formal vote.
Okay.
Did they
I think
need
it's
anyone to show up there in front of them, or have you already done that, Amy? Or will you
That
do
was, what, last Wednesday or something? Last
Okay.
week?
Oh, look at that. I'm only a week behind.
Okay. So does someone want to make a motion to support requesting the funding?
I'll make a motion that the board officially support the CPA funding request for the Town Forest and Cloverdale boardwalk extensions.
Wait, can you make that motion, Andrew? Are you allowed to?
Of course.
Okay. Just checking.
Second.
You second that, Chase?
Chase did, yep. All right, Andrew, go ahead.
Okay, roll call. Chase.
Chase, yes.
Julie.
Julie Rupp, aye.
Brian.
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Oh, Max, I.
And myself, aye. It's unanimous.
All right, great. Do we need the tree hunt too? I'm assuming they're doing the tree hunt again this year. They need the use
Yeah,
permit?
they'll be back for a land use permit. It didn't get in time. But I don't know if the commission wants to consider doing a tree this year.
Oh. That's an interesting thought.
That'd be cool.
Okay, Anna, I'll do it.
Our ornaments can be laminated filing forms, all the different kinds.
Oh my gosh.
Just multiple copies of the waiver. So people
Yeah,
can see the waiver. This is the waiver, guys. You sure you want to do this?
Put our regulations up.
Yeah. Maybe some drawing specifications for the occasional engineer that walks by. You know,
yeah.
Colored lines, all that.
Yeah, definitions of the colors.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those ornaments sound too big. Each 8.5 by 11.
Yeah. Those are-
We'll have to put up a 3 then. Fine.
yeah, yeah. Find a really big one. Here's what colors look like. Don't use magenta.
Well, it would be kind of funny to have all our conservation lands, you know,
yeah,
cut out and hung like little pictures of our conservation land.
I do have Boner helping out. I bet I could get Rachel to help out, like printing stuff out like that.
Ah, be cool. Oh,
That-
Kyle,
that
what's
would be
happening to your video here? You're staticky and your sound is too. Oh.
My week interest,
Oh.
apparently.
Fun.
It's fine all day today.
That's how it goes.
So you want to do minutes or do you want to just like leave?
I honestly haven't looked at the minutes, but doesn't mean I can't approve them.
Does it say approve the minutes for December?
That was an executive session, December 14th, 2020.
Oh, I didn't look at those.
Yeah. All right, so we can just table both of those.
Okay. I think that works.
Because this week's minutes will be nothing. I got 11 pages of notes here.
Yikes.
I'll be using the discussion ensued.
Endless hypotheticals explored.
Yeah.
It's your last hypothetical gave us the most distant time tonight. Like,
Listen, I'll go to bat for those hypotheticals.
No, that was good, productive discussion. So
Yep.
it's important. It's important. Sometimes these things take time.
So would you like a motion to adjourn, Julie?
I would definitely like a motion to adjourn.
Yes, get out of here before 11 o'clock.
I will move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Chase,
Chase, yes.
Julie,
Julia Rupp, bye.
Brian,
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle,
I'll Masulai.
and myself, I. All right.
Good night.
Thank everybody.
you.